My name's Karen. I'm 25 and work a regular job. My grandpa, who looked after me, passed away 6 months back. Today's the day when the lawyer will read out Grandpa's will. So I went to his house with my older sister Susan, who's my only family. Our folks died in a crash 20 years ago, so we grew up with our grandparents. Grandma died from being sick a while ago, and since then, Grandpa's health kept getting worse. Worried about him, I moved into an apartment nearby and visited him often. Karen, you're not a kid anymore. It's weird to keep running back here, my grandpa used to say, though he'd chuckle anyway. Then, one day, when I came over like always, I found him in pain at the door. Panicked, I called for help, but he passed away suddenly. Quit summing out. Make some tea at least, my sister's voice snapped me back. Right, the lawyer's coming, I replied, heading to the kitchen. Glancing back, I saw Susan lounging lazily on the floor, yawning. Even from the kitchen, her perfume was overwhelming. Same old Susan, I muttered, putting the kettle on. Susan never changed. She dyed her hair since she was a teenager, hung out with troublemakers, and never worked. Grandma and Grandpa always had to clean up her messes, and it seems she's still the same even as an adult. She's always bouncing from one part-time gig to another without any stability. I knew she'd been hitting up Grandpa for cash when I wasn't around. I could picture her finding it all too bothersome if it wasn't for the inheritance. Ah, you must be the lawyer. Thanks for being here today, my sister's formal tone announced the lawyer's arrival. Rushing, I filled the teapot with leaves and headed to the door. Thanks for coming, I greeted him. I'd seen him at the funeral. His eyes were kind, like Grandpa's. His lawyer badge gleamed on his chest. After paying respects to Grandpa's portrait, he sipped the tea I served and then pulled out Grandpa's will. It was entrusted to him while Grandpa was alive. The will stated, my sister Susan would get $20 million in cash, and I would inherit the house and land. My sister burst into laughter upon hearing the will. $20 million for the older sis and just an old house for you? How funny. Fits someone as dull as you, she mocked. It's not just the house. There's also the land, I shot back, but she only laughed sarcastically. Psh, this land in the middle of nowhere isn't worth much. I'd have preferred cash. Guess Grandpa favored me after all. I have to admit, it's a bit surprising. I guess Grandpa wanted me to take care of his cherished house and land, where he spent his life with Grandma, I said, reflecting on the will. A house and land? That's pretty cool, isn't it, Ryan? My boyfriend exclaimed, surprised by the news. I shook my head, silently conveying, it's not all that great, really. My sister got $20 million in cash. That's more impressive. Saying it aloud felt empty, even though I was just being honest. Wow, she's got looks and money now. She's on a winning streak, Brian remarked, unaware of how insensitive his comment sounded. Catching my glance, he quickly added, but your happiness means more to me than any money, Karen. Brian and I have been together since I started working. We met at a party, and being the same age, we hit it off. I've introduced him to my grandpa and my sister. Though he hasn't popped the question yet, I've been thinking about marriage. Today, on our first outdoor date, I ended up sharing the news of my inheritance with Brian. I guess I did it because I envisioned him as my future husband. Little did I know I would regret it later. A few days later, I went to the family home I inherited from my grandfather. I planned to tidy up and organize his belongings. The property was spacious, but the house was simple. I thought I could handle it alone as I looked around and contemplated. It's close to my job. Maybe I should move in here. Living peacefully with a cat doesn't sound too bad. No rent to worry about, and any upkeep expenses should be manageable since I've been saving up. Maybe someday with Brian. Blushing at the thought, I shook my head to clear it. Ready to get started on cleaning, I rolled up my sleeves, but then my phone rang. My sister's name flashed on my phone screen. Hey Karen, having a blast all alone in that old house? My sister sounded tipsy, elongating her words in her usual manner. But today it was worse than usual. Looks like you're hitting the bottle, huh? It's still daytime, I remarked with a sigh, to which she let out an exaggerated sigh in return. Oh, you're such a goody two-shoes. I was right, she was definitely drinking. I was thinking about moving in here eventually. I replied, hoping to wrap up the conversation quickly. Really? I'm lounging in a fancy hotel suite right now, my sister exclaimed in an overly dramatic tone. Guess who's keeping me company? I have no clue. Boring. That attitude won't win Brian over, she teased. What? Sorry, Karen. Brian's voice suddenly chimed in, catching me off guard. Confusion swirled in my mind, but I pushed away any unsettling thoughts. My imagination was playing tricks on me again, conjuring up absurd scenarios. Shocked? Huh? My sister's spiteful voice cut through. Ever since you introduced him to me, I thought Brian was quite a catch, she bragged, recounting how she'd been drawn to Brian since I introduced them, how she found out where he worked because of me, and how she'd approached him as soon as he finished work. He had eagerly gone along with her, telling her she was far more attractive than me. I listened in disbelief, unable to find words. Karen, I'm so sorry. Brian's voice came next. Please tell me this is a mistake. I tried to speak, but he continued. As a guy, I couldn't pass up the chance. I do feel guilty, but come on, who can resist a beautiful woman with $20 million, right? His words, asking for understanding, left me feeling drained of emotion. A chill washed over me, as if all warmth had been sucked away. You know what? I don't meet a man like you, I declared. My sister's laughter echoed loudly in the background. The voice on the phone reverted to hers. Well, that's the way it goes. Let's not pretend to be sisters anymore, okay? I don't want you running to me just because you're broke. With those cutting words, she hung up. Overwhelmed by delayed emotions, all I could do was cry out. It's been 5 years since then. A cat was curled up on my lap, peacefully dozing in front of my laptop. It purred contentedly in its sleep. Today was my day off, but I still had some work to finish up at home. Oh no, this won't help get the work done, I thought guiltily as I gently moved the cat aside. Just as I reached for my phone, it began to ring. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. Thinking it might be work-related, I answered without hesitation. Hey Karen, it's been ages. The voice on the other end greeted me, instantly recognizable as my sister's. I froze at the sound of her familiar tone. It's me, Karen. I can tell by the way you say hello. After all, I'm your big sister. 5 years had passed, making Susan 34 now. I couldn't help but smirk at her unchanged manner of speaking. You're still the same. By the way, I came home, and there's a hotel in its place. Did you sell the house? That's none of your business. Ah, come on. It's a pretty fancy hotel, right? You must have made a good amount of cash. Growing irritated, I was about to hang up when she launched into chatter about her current situation. According to Susan, she'd blown through the inheritance in just 2 years and now found herself in significant debt. Even Brian, who she was still with, seemed to be struggling financially. I was left speechless. Honestly, I couldn't care less. Sorry, but that's not happening, I replied calmly, despite Susan's yelling. I had always questioned why Grandpa had divided his estate that way. But on the day you took Brian from me and cut ties, I finally understood. I began to speak slowly. 5 years ago, when Brian ended things, I was devastated. After sobbing my heart out, I sat numbly in my room, lost in thought. I'm such a fool, I whispered, tears streaming down my face once more. My gaze fell on a painting I had crafted as a child and given to my grandfather. He had cherished it, framing it and displaying it with pride. With shaky hands, I retrieved the painting. Grandpa, as waves of nostalgia and loneliness washed over me, tears blurring my vision, I noticed something fall from the back of the frame. Picking it up, I realized it was a fresh sheet of notepaper addressed to me. I remembered how, as a child, I used to stick notes on the back of that frame, exchanging secret messages with my grandfather. It was like our family journal. Knowing I would inherit the house, he must have assumed I would find this note. I was grateful I noticed it. The thought of leaving it unnoticed sent shivers down my spine. To Karen, the letter began, dated just before my grandfather's passing. I knew you'd find this letter eventually. You're probably wondering why I divided my estate this way, giving cash to your sister and leaving you the old house and land. It may seem like I favored Susan, but that's not true. Despite appearances, I wanted to leave most of my estate to you, who cared for me until the end. Finally, everything clicked into place. Despite Susan's words, Grandpa valued me more, huh? I'm sure Susan's cruel remarks hurt deeply at the time. Despite my greater love for Grandpa, a pang of jealousy, I continued reading the letter. But Susan wouldn't be satisfied with a fair split. This girl, even as her grandfather, I must admit, she's terribly greedy. Just like her grandpa. She even stole my boyfriend. That's what I want to tell him deep down. I thought to myself, that's why I set things up this way. At first glance, Susan may seem to have gotten the better deal, but she won't pay much attention to your share. According to Grandpa's letter, the value of this land in our area keeps increasing due to ongoing urban development. It may not be worth Susan's $20 million yet, but its value will surely rise in the future. As I read further, my eyes widened in surprise. You can live here if you're attached to it, or you can sell it when its value rises enough to make a good profit. All I want is for you to be happy. After conveying the letter's content, Susan clicked her tongue and muttered, "Old hag." I did live in that house for a while, but when I got married, I decided to sell it, just like Grandpa's letter suggested. The land value had risen enough by then. "I'm not lending you any money," Susan said, sounding frustrated. Then, as if struck by an idea, she added, "Hey, how about this? I'll give Brian back to you. Help out your sister. It's a good deal, right?" In that moment, something inside me snapped. Enough is enough. Grandpa took care of you, and yet you've shown no gratitude. I'm disgusted by that. You're not my sister anymore, and I'm already married. I don't need Brian, and I don't even want to see his face. Stay out of my life for good, I declared before hanging up. I quickly blocked her number, and my cat, sensing the tension, retreated to the bed. I scooped up my cat and whispered, "I'm sorry." Soon after, Susan and Brian barged into our old house. Were they trying to return Brian to me? They seemed to have misunderstood something, yelling about being my family, even though I had already sold the land and had no ties to it anymore. It's pretty straightforward for those two. I sold the land, and an inn was built on it. Therefore, I must be the owner of the inn. Naturally, the staff reported them to the police. They were arrested for damaging several items in the inn. Additionally, it was uncovered that they had engaged in marriage fraud for money in the past. It seems they'll be sent to prison together. I was also questioned by the police, but I quickly proved that I had no involvement. Since we were estranged, I was released. As my husband and I were leaving the station, we heard shouting and turned to look. There were Susan and Brian, looking completely different. Thankfully, they didn't notice us. Both of them had disheveled hair, worn-out clothes, and looked nothing like the people I remembered. Especially Susan, who never went without makeup and stylish attire, looked drastically different. They were likely being transferred to another location. As I watched them, a wave of melancholy washed over me. My husband and I exchanged a glance, and he offered his hand. I took it, and together we left the police station. "Are you all right?" My husband's eyes were full of concern as he looked at me. "I'm okay. I have you and our little one," I said, placing my hand on my slightly swollen belly and returning his smile. "There's a new member of our family growing inside me. Money is important, but there's something even more precious. That's what I want to instill in our child with you by my side."
It was just a regular evening when I came home. The weight of the long day at work was still fresh, and my tired feet could feel every step as I climbed up to our small apartment on the 3rd floor. The familiar scent of our home greeted me, and for a moment, I hoped for a quiet evening. But that hope was quickly shattered. As soon as I opened the door, I found Mark, my husband, lounging on the old brown couch. He had the remote in one hand and a half-empty beer in the other. The television was blaring some show or another, but Mark's focus shifted to me as soon as I stepped in. "Betty," he started, not even greeting me, "I want a pie tonight." I blinked in surprise. "Mark, I just got back from work, and I'm really tired. Can we have it tomorrow instead?" He didn't look happy. "You're home now, aren't you? So make a pie. It's not that hard." I sighed. I remember my mother always said to be understanding and accommodating. But sometimes it felt like it was always me doing the accommodating. Nevertheless, I headed to the kitchen, deciding that making a pie might be the quicker route to peace. The apartment wasn't big, just a single bedroom, a living area combined with a dining space, and a small kitchen. I quickly gathered the ingredients, hoping to finish the pie as soon as possible. As I was rolling out the dough, Mark strolled into the kitchen. "Make sure it's apple, and none of that store-bought crust stuff." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We had store-bought crust, but I knew better than to use it now. I made the pie from scratch, just like he wanted. It took me a good hour to prepare everything. The aroma of the baking pie filled the apartment, and for a moment, everything felt cozy and right. I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, this pie could be the start of a pleasant evening. But when the timer went off and I took the pie out, letting it cool on the counter, my hopes were dashed again. Mark was back in the kitchen, barely waiting for the pie to cool down before taking a big slice. After a few bites, his face contorted in displeasure. Without a word, he picked up the plate and threw the pie slice onto the floor, where it landed with a sad splat. "That was terrible," he spat out. I was stunned. All my efforts, all the care I put into that pie, and this was the reaction I got. Tears filled my eyes, but I tried to hold them back. "What was wrong with it?" I managed to ask. "Everything," he replied curtly. "You should know better." I didn't know what to say. I felt so small, so insignificant. The shattered pie on the floor seemed like a reflection of our relationship, broken and messy. Feeling defeated, I cleaned up the mess, the weight of years of unhappiness pressing down on me. It wasn't just about the pie, it was about everything. The lack of appreciation, the constant demands, the way Mark looked at me or didn't look at me. All of it. That night, I knew I needed a break. I couldn't stay in that apartment. I needed to be with someone who understood, someone who cared. That's why I turned to William, my brother. He had always been my rock. Grabbing my bag and leaving the mess behind, I decided to spend the night at his place. William's home was a cozy two-story building with a small garden in the front. I didn't even have to knock. He must have heard my car because he opened the door before I reached it, his face filled with concern. "Betty?" he started, pulling me into a comforting hug. "What happened?" Tears streamed down my face as I mumbled. "He threw the pie, Will. The pie I made after a long day at work. He just threw it on the floor." William led me inside, settling me on the soft couch in his living room. "Tell me everything," he urged, handing me a cup of hot tea. Sipping the warm drink, I began to recount the events of the evening. As I spoke, memories of the past also surfaced. "It wasn't just tonight, Will. It's been this way for years. I always thought things would change, that he would change. Remember when we first met at Jenna's party? He was so charming then." William nodded. "I remember. But Betty, people can put on a facade for a while, but their true colors always come out." "You know," I continued, "when we first got married, everything was great. We'd go on dates, laugh, talk for hours. But as the years went by, he changed, or maybe I just saw the real him." William's face tightened. "He didn't start off this way?" I shook my head. "No, we'd have our disagreements, but it was never like this. Over the years, he just became more demanding, more critical. I don't know when I started feeling like I was walking on eggshells around him." William sighed deeply. "You know, Mom and Dad had their issues, but Dad never treated Mom this way." "I know," I replied, tears forming again. "I thought I could change him, make him see how hurtful he was being. But no matter what I did, it was never good enough." William looked at me seriously. "Betty, love doesn't work that way. You can't change someone who doesn't see a problem in their actions." I looked down, taking another sip of my tea. I remember when Mom and Dad would argue, but Dad would always apologize, always make up for it. Mark never does. There was a pause. Then William said, "Betty, you deserve better. Remember when we were kids? We promised each other we'd always be there. I'm here for you now. You need to think about yourself, your happiness." I nodded, taking in his words. The realization was growing within me. This wasn't the life I envisioned for myself. I deserved respect, love, and care. And it was clear I wasn't going to get that from Mark. "You're right," I finally admitted. "I can't keep living like this. It's time to make a change." William squeezed my hand. "I'll be with you every step of the way." The morning light filtered through the curtains of William's guest room. I stretched, feeling more rested than I had in a long time. The decision to divorce Mark had brought with it a mixture of relief and apprehension. Walking downstairs, I found William already up, making breakfast in the kitchen. "Morning, sis," he greeted with a warm smile. "Good morning," I replied, pulling up a chair at the dining table. He placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of me. "You need to eat. Big day today." I nodded, taking a bite. I'm nervous, Will, but it's the right thing to do. He sat across from me, sipping his coffee. It's never easy, but remember, you're doing this for yourself, and I'm right here with you. After breakfast, William drove me to the lawyer's office. As we parked, I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the steps ahead. Inside, we were greeted by Mrs. Harris, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes. But as she spoke, her kindness shone through. Betty, I understand this is a difficult time for you. My job is to guide you through the legal process and make sure your interests are protected, she said. Thank you, I whispered, feeling grateful for her support. The meeting was long, filled with paperwork and legalities. Mrs. Harris explained everything patiently, ensuring I understood my rights and the process ahead. As the days turned into weeks, life became a whirlwind of appointments, meetings, and paperwork. Mark, to my surprise, remained silent throughout this time. He neither signed the divorce papers nor contested them. He simply seemed to have disappeared. This silence was unsettling. One evening, while sitting with William in his living room, I expressed my concerns. It's strange, Will. Mark hasn't reacted at all. No calls, no messages, nothing. It's like he's vanished. William looked thoughtful. It is odd, especially given how he was earlier, but maybe he realized his mistakes and wants to move on. I hope so, I sighed, though a nagging doubt lingered. Life continued its pace. I started looking for a new place to live. I wanted a fresh start, a home where I could rebuild my life without the shadows of the past. After a few weeks of searching, I found a beautiful house. It was spacious, with large windows letting in plenty of light, a stark contrast to the dim apartment I had shared with Mark. I felt a connection the moment I stepped in. This was my new beginning. William was ecstatic when he saw the place. It's perfect for you, Betty, a place to call your own. As we toured the house, I shared my plans with him. I want to paint the walls light blue, maybe have some plants by the windows. He chuckled. Always the planner. It sounds wonderful. Moving in was a joyous occasion. With the help of William and a few friends, the house quickly started to feel like a home. Every evening, after work, I'd return to my sanctuary, relishing the peace it brought. However, that peace was short-lived. One fateful evening, as I returned home, I found the front door ajar. A chill ran down my spine. Pushing the door open, I stepped in cautiously. The sight that greeted me was unexpected and alarming. There, in the living room, sat Mark. My heart raced as I took in the scene before me. Mark sat at my dining table, his belongings scattered around. A sense of violation washed over me. This was my space, my sanctuary, and he had invaded it. "What are you doing here, Mark?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, his face showing a mix of smugness and defiance. "Well, it's our house, isn't it? We're still married, Betty. But I bought this house after we separated. It has nothing to do with you," I shot back. Mark sneered, leaning back in the chair. "Doesn't matter. As your husband, I have every right to be here." Just then, Anna, my au pair, walked in, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Betty. He showed me his ID and marriage certificate. He said he had every right to be here. I didn't know what to do." I sighed. "It's okay, Anna. This isn't your fault." Turning my attention back to Mark, I said, "You need to leave, Mark. This is my home, not yours." Mark chuckled. "Think again, sweetheart. I'll be staying here. And if you try to kick me out, I'll make sure to claim half of everything in our divorce." The audacity of his claim left me reeling. I felt trapped, cornered in my own home. But I couldn't let him see my fear. I needed to be strong. "Fine," I said, trying to sound calm. "Stay tonight. But tomorrow, I'm getting a lawyer, and we'll see who has the right to be here." Mark smirked. "Bring it on. I'm not going anywhere." Feeling defeated, I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I needed to think, to come up with a plan. Grabbing my phone, I called William. "Will," I said, tears forming. "He's here, at the house. He says he has a right to it." William's voice was filled with anger and concern. "Stay calm, Betty. I'm on my way. We'll sort this out." Hanging up, I tried to calm my racing heart. Mark's sudden reappearance and bold claims had taken me by surprise. But with William by my side, I felt a glimmer of hope. Within minutes, William arrived. I heard the two of them talking in hushed tones downstairs. The tension in the air was palpable. After what felt like an eternity, William came up to my room. "Betty," he began, his face serious, "there's something you need to know. When we bought this house, I made sure it was in my name. I had a feeling Mark might pull something like this. Legally, he has no claim to this property." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank you, Will. I don't know what I would do without you." He hugged me. "We're family. We look out for each other." The next morning, armed with the property papers and William's unwavering support, I confronted Mark. Seeing the documents, he realized he had no ground to stand on. His smugness from the night before had disappeared. "This isn't over, Betty," he hissed as he left. Days turned into weeks. With every passing day, the intrusion by Mark felt more like a distant memory, but the threat he posed remained. William and I, however, weren't about to sit idly by. One evening, as we sat in the living room, William looked at me with a seriousness I had seldom seen. "Betty, I've been thinking. We need to be prepared for any moves Mark might make. He's unpredictable." I nodded. "I've been feeling the same. But what can we do?" William paused, taking a deep breath. "I've hired a private detective. I wanted to know what Mark's been up to since the two of you separated." I looked at him in shock. "A private detective? Will, is that necessary?" William sighed. "I just have this gut feeling. I want to make sure we have all our bases covered." I understood William's concerns. His protective nature was one of the things I cherished most about him. "All right," I conceded. "What did the detective find?" William pulled out a folder from his bag. As he spread the photos and documents on the table, my heart sank. The pictures showed Mark with various women. Some looked familiar from our past life. One document caught my eye, a police report filed by a woman against Mark. He did this?" I whispered, disbelief evident in my voice. William nodded gravely. "It appears Mark's activities haven't been on the straight and narrow. This could be our leverage. If he tries to make any more moves against you, we can use this against him." I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. I can't believe he sunk this low. William put a reassuring hand on mine. "We'll get through this, Betty, together." A few days later, our preparation proved to be fortuitous. A letter arrived from Mark's attorney, making wild claims and threats about taking me to court for supposed shared assets and conjuring up fabricated tales about our life together. Reading the letter, my hands shook. But William, ever the pillar of strength, looked at me and said, "We're ready for this, Betty. We've got evidence. He can't intimidate us." With William's support, we met with Mrs. Harris again. As she read through the letter and went over the evidence we had against Mark, her face remained unreadable. After a long pause, she finally said, "We have a strong case here. Mark's claims are baseless, especially with the evidence we have. We'll counter this. Don't worry." Relief washed over me, but the idea of facing Mark in court was still daunting. William, sensing my anxiety, squeezed my hand. "We've got this. I won't let him hurt you anymore." The countermove was set in motion. Mrs. Harris swiftly drafted a response, highlighting Mark's activities and questioning the credibility of his claims. The ball was now in Mark's court. Every day after that was a game of wait and watch. William and I spent many evenings going over the possibilities, preparing for any scenario. Through it all, William's unwavering support gave me the strength to face each day. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. William and I were watching a movie when the knock echoed through the house. With a look of mutual surprise, I went to open the door. Standing there was a woman, soaked to the bone, her eyes red from crying. "Are you Betty?" she asked, her voice shaky. I nodded cautiously. "Yes, who are you?" She took a deep breath. "My name is Jenna. I was involved with Mark." My heart skipped a beat. "Come in," I said, motioning for her to enter. Once seated, Jenna began her story. "I met Mark a few months ago. At first, he seemed charming, but soon he started showing his true colors. I heard about you, about his past, and I thought I should come and warn you." Warn me, I thought. What could be worse than what I already knew? Jenna continued, tears streaming down her face. He became aggressive, possessive. He said things about you, about how you'd ruined his life, and he wanted revenge. William's face darkened. What kind of revenge? Jenna hesitated, looking down. He talked about ruining you financially, said he had friends who could make it happen. The room was silent for a few minutes, the gravity of Jenna's words sinking in. Finally, William broke the silence. We need to do something about this. We can't let him continue to terrorize people. I nodded in agreement, feeling a newfound determination. We need to expose him, let everyone know who he really is. Over the next few weeks, with Jenna's help, William and I gathered more evidence against Mark. From his financial misdeeds to his numerous affairs, the depth of his deceit became apparent. It wasn't just me he had hurt. There were others, just like Jenna. With everything we had, William suggested we go to the police. It's time he faces the consequences of his actions. Walking into the police station, I felt a mix of fear and hope. Would they believe us? Would they take action? Detective Rogers was assigned to our case. As we laid out our evidence, he listened intently, occasionally asking questions. Finally, after what felt like hours, he spoke. This is substantial evidence. We'll investigate further, but from what you've shown, it's clear that Mark has been involved in illegal activities. The next few days were a blur. The police acted swiftly, arresting Mark on multiple charges. The news spread, and soon, the monster I had once called my husband was unmasked to the world. Months passed after the revelation. With Mark behind bars, I should have felt safer. And while there was certainly a sense of relief, there was also the constant fear of what Mark's friends might do, those he had often bragged about, who he said would always have his back. One day, as I was returning from work, I noticed something odd. My mail was scattered all over the porch, and the front door looked like someone tried to tamper with it. Panic surged. Could this be one of Mark's allies? I immediately called William. "Will, I think someone tried to break in." "Stay calm," he replied, his voice firm. "I'll be right over." I waited inside my car until William arrived. Surveying the scene, he confirmed my suspicions. "It looks like an attempted break-in. We need to beef up your security." Over the next few days, William and I worked on improving the safety of the house, installing security cameras and an advanced alarm system. One evening, as we were testing the systems, the alarm suddenly blared. Rushing to the monitor, we saw a man skulking around the property. But before he could make any moves, the local police, alerted by the security company, arrived and apprehended him. I felt a rush of gratitude towards William. His foresight had prevented another potential disaster. The next day, Detective Rogers called. "Betty, we've got the intruder in custody. He claims he was sent by Mark, but we're still confirming the details." This confirmed my worst fears. Mark was still trying to control and hurt me, even from jail. Days later, I got a call from Jenna. "Betty, there's something you should know." She hesitated before speaking. "Mark's been reaching out to people from prison. He's been trying to spread lies about you." I gritted my teeth. "Thank you, Jenna. He won't get away with this." That evening, William had an idea. "Betty, we need to turn the tables. We've got evidence, Jenna's testimony, and a lot more. Let's go public." The next week, with the help of William's contacts, we scheduled a press conference. The media turnout was massive, with numerous reporters eager to hear my side of the story. As I stepped up to the podium, my heart pounded. "Hello, everyone. Today, I want to share my story, not just to expose Mark's cruelty, but to give hope to all those who've been in abusive relationships." I detailed everything, from our first meeting to the pie incident, to Jenna's revelations and the attempted break-in. As I spoke, the room was silent, every eye focused on me. When I finished, the questions began. "Do you believe Mark is still a threat?" I replied confidently. "Yes, but I won't let him or anyone else intimidate me any longer." Another reporter asked, "How do you feel about him now?" I paused for a moment. "I pity him. For someone to have so much hate, he must be truly miserable." After the press conference, the support was overwhelming. Messages poured in from all over, many from women sharing their own experiences. It was clear that by speaking out, I had ignited a movement. That evening, as I sat with William, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you, Will. Today, I took back my power." William smiled warmly. "You always had it, Betty. You just needed a little push." The next morning, William dropped by. "Got some news," he said, a glint in his eyes. "Remember the intruder?" I nodded, recalling the fear of that night. How could I forget? "Well," he began, "the court has sentenced him, and with all the evidence stacked against him, he'll be locked up for a long time." Relief washed over me. "That's good to hear." "And there's more," he continued. "Mark's been transferred to a high-security prison. With his recent antics and connections, he won't be coming out anytime soon." I hugged William tightly. "Thank you for everything, for being there when I felt alone." William smiled. Family sticks together. Weeks turned into months, and life started to regain its rhythm. I reconnected with friends, started a support group for victims of abuse, and even began dating again. On my birthday, I held a small get-together. As I looked around at the faces, William, Jenna, my new friends, and old ones, I realized how far I had come. The wounds of the past were healing, replaced by the joy of new memories. Late into the night, as everyone left, William sat down next to me. "You've done well, Betty." I looked at him, tears glistening. "With a little help from my friends." He chuckled. "Always."
It felt like yesterday when I met Robert. It was at a charity event in the town hall. The place was buzzing with people, all dressed up, looking their best. I was there because I felt like I needed to be part of the community after moving to the town only a few months ago. Robert was there representing his family's business. "Hi, I'm Robert," he introduced himself, extending his hand. His blue eyes looked genuine and friendly. "Hi, Robert, I'm Clara," I replied, shaking his hand. We chatted about everything under the sun, from our childhood memories to our favorite movies. I found out that he had grown up in this town and had a family business here. I told him about my parents and how I lost them when I was just a kid. He listened intently, and I could feel he genuinely cared. "I'm so sorry about your parents," he said sincerely. "It must have been tough growing up without them." "It was," I admitted, "but their love always remained with me. Plus, I inherited a good amount from my father. It helps me remember them." As the night progressed, we found ourselves more and more engrossed in our conversation, completely oblivious to the hustle and bustle around us. Before we knew it, the event was wrapping up. "Would you like to grab a coffee sometime?" Robert asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I'd love to," I replied, smiling. Our coffee dates turned into dinner dates, and before we knew it, we were planning our wedding. It all happened so fast. I was 27, with an inheritance from my parents and a heart full of hope. Robert was everything I had ever wanted, or so I thought. After the wedding, I was introduced to his family. His dad, Mr. Lawson, was a gentle and warm man. The first time we met, he gave me a big hug and said, "Welcome to the family, dear. I hope you find all the happiness you deserve." Mrs. Lawson, on the other hand, was a stark contrast. She looked me up and down, her eyes cold and calculating. "I hope you know what you're getting into, marrying into our family," she said with a thinly veiled warning. Robert jumped in, trying to ease the tension. "Mom, be nice. Clara is my wife now, and I expect everyone to treat her with respect." In those early days, I tried to focus on the positive. I was in love, and I was hopeful that things would get better with time. Little did I know the roller coaster of events that awaited me in the next few chapters of my life. Several months into our marriage, things seemed to be going well. Robert and I had settled into a rhythm. We would often take evening walks, discussing our plans for the future. Our home was a cozy space that we both loved. One morning, I woke up feeling a little off. I was nauseous and had a strange feeling in my stomach. A few days later, the realization hit me. Could I be pregnant? I quickly bought a pregnancy test, and to my shock, it came out positive. I was flooded with a mix of emotions. While I was excited about the possibility of becoming a mother, I was also nervous about how Robert would react, especially considering his mom's clear disdain for me. That evening, after dinner, I decided to share the news. "Robert," I began, taking a deep breath, "I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant." He looked at me, and for a moment, his face was unreadable. Then, to my surprise and hurt, he said, "Is it even mine?" I was taken aback. "What? Of course it is! How can you even ask that?" He looked away, avoiding my gaze. "It's just... I don't know, Clara. Everything happened so fast. Our marriage and now this. I need some time to think." I tried to hold back my tears, feeling a mixture of anger and hurt. "Robert, I never expected this from you. This child is ours, and I hoped you'd be happy." He didn't reply. Instead, he left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next few weeks were tough. My pregnancy symptoms started to kick in, and Robert's cold behavior didn't help. I found solace in the fact that this child was a symbol of our love, even if Robert didn't see it that way. One day, Mrs. Lawson came over unannounced. "I heard the news," she said without preamble. "Is it even true?" "Yes, it's true," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. She smirked. "You think having this child will solidify your place in this family? You're wrong." I felt a surge of anger. This is my family too now, and this child will be a part of it whether you like it or not. She scoffed. "We'll see about that." And with that, she left. The next few months were a blur. I tried to focus on my health and the baby, but the constant tension at home and Robert's doubt wore me down. My only comfort was the small kicks and movements I felt inside me, reminding me that there was a life growing within, waiting to meet the world. But little did I know that the challenges ahead were far greater than what I had already faced. As my pregnancy progressed, it became harder to manage everything on my own. I was constantly nauseous, and even the simplest chores seemed daunting. Robert was indifferent, often coming home late, leaving me to fend for myself. That's when he made the proposal I'd come to regret. "Clara," he began one evening, "I've been thinking. Since you're finding it hard to manage things here, and my parents' house is much bigger with help available, maybe we should move there for a while, until the baby arrives." I was hesitant. Mrs. Lawson's attitude towards me was clear, but at the same time, I felt weak and overwhelmed. "I don't know, Robert. Your mom hasn't exactly been welcoming." He looked at me, trying to reassure. "It's a big house, Clara. We won't even cross paths much, and Dad will be there. You know he likes you." In my vulnerable state, I agreed, thinking it might be for the best. Moving into the Lawsons' residence was an eye-opener. It was a grand house, reflecting the years of prosperity the family enjoyed. But with its grandeur came coldness. The vast hallways echoed with silence. The huge rooms felt devoid of warmth. The only solace came from Mr. Lawson. "Welcome, Clara," he said with a kind smile, giving me a comforting pat on the back. "Don't worry about anything here. Consider this place your home." But the peace was short-lived. Mrs. Lawson's digs and snide remarks were a daily ordeal. She would comment on everything, from the food I ate to the clothes I wore. One day, when I was in the kitchen trying to make myself a sandwich, she walked in, her eyes scanning me up and down. "You sure you should be eating that?" she commented, looking at the sandwich. I took a deep breath. "I think I know what's best for me and my baby," she smirked. "Well, if it is even your baby." I felt my anger rise but held it in check. "It's Robert's baby, and I wish you'd stop implying otherwise." She just laughed, a cold sound that echoed in the large kitchen. Time will tell, dear. Time will tell. Days turned into weeks. Each day was harder than the last. The house felt like a prison. Robert was always out, and when he was home, he was distant. The baby inside me was my only comfort, reminding me that there was a reason for enduring all this. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room trying to read, Robert stormed in, a frown on his face. "Clara, I heard you've been talking back to my mom." I looked up, surprised. "She has been nothing but rude to me, Robert. What do you expect?" He shook his head. "This is her house. You need to respect that." I felt tears forming. "I thought it was our house too, but every day it feels like I'm walking on eggshells." He didn't say anything, just turned and left the room. I sat there, feeling more alone than ever. As the days passed, the cold shadows of the house seemed to close in on me. But I held on, hoping for better days, not realizing that the worst was yet to come. Fall had settled in, and the leaves outside had started their gradual transformation to a vibrant mix of red and gold. The wind carried with it a sharp chill, heralding the coming winter. But inside the house, the atmosphere was even colder. One evening, after a particularly tiring day, the baby wouldn't stop crying. He was restless, and I tried every trick in the book to calm him down. Mrs. Lawson, evidently irritated by the cries, barged into the room. "Why can't you keep that child quiet? It's unbearable." Holding my crying son, I replied tiredly, "He's just a baby, Mrs. Lawson. They cry sometimes." She scoffed. "Well, maybe if you were a better mother." "Enough of this," I retorted, fed up. "I'm trying my best here. I don't need your constant criticisms." Her face went scarlet with anger. "You have some nerve talking back to me in my own house." The commotion drew Robert in. "What's going on?" "Your wife seems to think she can disrespect me under my own roof," Mrs. Lawson spat. Robert glanced at me, annoyance evident in his eyes. "Clara, just take the baby to our room." Standing my ground, I replied, "Robert, this is our home too. I won't be bullied into hiding." He took a deep breath, his patience clearly running thin. "Clara, just do as I say." When I didn't move, Mrs. Lawson sneered, "If you can't follow the rules, maybe you should leave." Robert, to my shock, nodded in agreement. "Maybe you should." Stunned, I replied, "You can't be serious." His face hardening, Robert stepped forward. "If you won't go to our room, then maybe you should leave the house." "You're throwing me out?" I asked, voice shaky with disbelief. Robert didn't answer. Instead, he moved closer, took hold of my arm, and began pulling me towards the door. I tried to resist, but he was too strong. Holding our crying baby close, I was dragged out of the house. The door slammed behind me, leaving me and my child in the biting cold of the fall evening. Tears streamed down my face, not just from the cold wind, but from the sharp sting of betrayal. My own husband, the man I loved, had just thrown me out of our home. The magnitude of what had just happened weighed heavily on my shoulders as I walked away, holding my child close, trying to shield him from the cold wind. The weight of the night's events pressed heavily on my chest, making each step seem like a monumental effort. My son, sensing my distress, had stopped crying but was whimpering softly. I was at a loss as to where to go. It felt like the world had turned its back on me. Then, a thought struck me. Rachel, my oldest friend, someone who had stood by me during the happiest and saddest times of my life. We'd lost touch recently, primarily because of the tension in my home, but I was sure she'd help. She lived nearby, just a few blocks away. I headed towards her apartment, praying she was home. As I approached the familiar building, memories of our times together flooded my mind. Our college days, the late-night chats, and the countless cups of coffee we'd shared. I reached her door and knocked hesitantly. After what felt like an eternity, the door swung open, revealing a surprised Rachel. "Clara?" My God, what happened to you? Why are you here in the middle of the night with the baby? Choking back tears, I managed, Rachel, I didn't know where else to go. She immediately pulled me into a tight embrace, murmuring words of comfort. Come in, come in. Once inside, sitting on her warm couch with a hot cup of tea in hand, I recounted everything. From the tensions with Robert and his mother to the ultimate betrayal that left me on the streets. Rachel listened patiently, her face a mixture of anger and concern. I knew that Robert was changing, but this is unthinkable. I nodded, tears streaming down. He chose them over us, Rach, his own son. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. I can't believe Mrs. Lawson would do something like this, but we'll figure something out, okay? I just don't get it. Why the sudden animosity? Why the doubt over our son? Rachel sighed. People change, Clara. Sometimes not for the better. But you've got your son and friends who care about you. We'll get through this together. Feeling a little calmer, I asked, What do I do now, Rach? She thought for a moment. First, let's get you both settled for the night. Tomorrow, we'll think of the next steps. Maybe talk to a lawyer? Nodding, I replied, I never thought I'd need one against my own husband. Rachel gave a sad smile. Life throws curveballs, Clara. But remember, you're strong, and you're not alone. Feeling a weight lift off my shoulders, I hugged Rachel tight. Thank you. The night was spent in Rachel's guest room. Though I barely got a wink of sleep, having her by my side made me feel a bit safer, a little less lost. The road ahead was uncertain, but with friends like Rachel, I knew I could face whatever lay in store. The morning after the eviction felt surreal. Waking up in Rachel's apartment, the events of the previous night played back in my mind, and a sinking feeling settled in my chest. After a silent breakfast, Rachel, with her unwavering determination, declared, We're going to get answers today. You mean about Robert's sudden change and Mrs. Lawson's animosity? I asked. Exactly, Rachel responded, pulling out her phone. I have a contact, Paul, a private investigator. He's helped some friends in the past. Maybe he can help us understand what's really going on. With that, Rachel dialed a number. Paul? Hey, it's Rachel. I've got a situation here. Yes, I'll text you the details. Turning to me, she added, He's good, Clara. We'll know what's happening soon. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Paul discreetly began his investigation, tailing Robert and Mrs. Lawson. Each evening, he'd provide Rachel and me with updates. It wasn't long before Paul unearthed shocking revelations. I've been following Robert, and it appears he's seeing someone else, he said one evening, handing over a few photographs. My heart sank as I looked at the pictures of Robert and an unfamiliar woman, laughing, dining, and even shopping together. Rachel, anger evident in her voice, asked, Do you have any idea who she is? Paul nodded. Her name's Angela, works in a law firm downtown, but that's not all. I've got audio recordings of Mrs. Lawson that you might find interesting. He played back a conversation where Mrs. Lawson discussed her elaborate plan to have me thrown out so that Robert could gain access to my inheritance. Her voice, dripping with greed, sent chills down my spine. Once Clara's out of the picture, Robert can divorce her. With a good lawyer, he can claim a good portion of her inheritance for emotional distress or some such nonsense. Angela's firm will handle it. Our boy deserves that money more than she does. I sat in stunned silence. It all made a cruel kind of sense now. Robert's doubts about our son's paternity, the constant harassment, it was all part of a twisted scheme. Rachel, seething with anger, declared, We're taking this to the police, and you're getting a lawyer, Clara. We'll fight them. Paul nodded. I've got more recordings and photos. It's concrete evidence. While the truth was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing it gave me a renewed sense of purpose. No longer would I be the victim. With evidence in hand and Rachel by my side, I was ready to confront Robert and Mrs. Lawson and reclaim not just my inheritance, but my dignity and peace of mind. The chapter of betrayal in my life was about to be closed, and I was determined to ensure justice was served. With the evidence in hand and my resolve firm, it was time to confront my soon-to-be ex-husband and his conniving mother. I decided to go to their house, the house I once called home. Rachel insisted on accompanying me, a pillar of strength and support. As we approached the house, my heart raced, but not from fear. It was anger, determination, and the desire to close this traumatic chapter in my life. We rang the doorbell, and Mrs. Lawson answered, feigning surprise. "Clara, what brings you here?" Without mincing words, I replied, "You know why I'm here." Robert appeared from the living room, looking rather uneasy. "Clara," he began, but I cut him off. "No, Robert, it's my turn to talk. We know everything." I held up the photos and the transcripts of the recordings. Mrs. Lawson's face turned pale while Robert looked like he'd been caught red-handed. "How did you—" "Doesn't matter how," Rachel interrupted. "What matters is that you both have been exposed." I took a deep breath, finding my voice. "You thought you could play with my life? You thought you could get rid of me and take everything I've inherited from my parents?" Robert tried to speak. "Clara, No," I shot back. "I gave you everything. My love, my trust, and all you gave back were lies and betrayal. Your affair with Angela, your scheming with your mother to get your hands on my inheritance, you won't get a single cent." Mrs. Lawson, always the instigator, tried to salvage the situation. "Clara, dear, let's discuss this calmly. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." I scoffed. "Misunderstanding? I've heard your conversations. You orchestrated this entire sham, making Robert doubt our child and pushing me out. And for what? Money? How low can you stoop?" Rachel stepped forward. "We've already spoken to the police, Mrs. Lawson, and Clara has a lawyer. You won't escape this." As we walked away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Confronting them had been cathartic. While the journey ahead would be long and challenging, I was ready to rebuild my life, free from the shackles of deceit and betrayal. The courtroom was filled with tense energy, a battleground of truth against deceit, the place where my long-awaited vindication would finally occur. My attorney presented our first piece of evidence, the results of the paternity test that unequivocally proved Robert was indeed the father of my child. The judge reviewed it, casting a stern look at Robert. "Do you have anything to say?" Robert looked down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "No, Your Honor." Next, we presented the DNA results that would shatter the very foundation of the Lawson family. "Your Honor," my attorney began, "these results indicate that Mr. Robert Lawson is not biologically related to Mr. Richard Lawson." The courtroom went silent. All eyes turned to Mrs. Lawson, her usual confident demeanor replaced with a deer-in-headlights expression. Richard, who had been sitting with a stoic face, looked at his wife with disbelief. You lied to me all these years?" Richard's voice wavered. Mrs. Lawson, trying to regain some semblance of control, stammered, "Richard, it's not what it looks like." But the evidence was irrefutable. The judge continued with the proceedings, his voice firm. Given all the evidence presented, the court rules in favor of Mrs. Clara. Robert Lawson will receive no part of her inheritance. He is also mandated to pay alimony for their child. Furthermore, considering the emotional trauma inflicted upon Mrs. Clara, the court also mandates Robert to pay damages. Mrs. Lawson, once the formidable matriarch, now looked small and defeated. But the courtroom had one more revelation that would strip her of her last vestiges of power. Richard stood up, facing his soon-to-be ex-wife. "I've filed for divorce, and I've already begun the proceedings to claim our house. You won't see a single penny from our joint assets." She was speechless. her empire and decades of manipulation crumbling around her. Walking out of the courtroom, the sunlight seemed brighter, the world fuller. Rachel hugged me tightly. "You did it, Clara. Justice is served." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. It's over. Finally. And as I moved forward, with my son in my arms, I knew I was walking towards a better, brighter future.
Hi, I'm Anna. I've been with Rob for quite a while now. We met in college, got married soon after, and have been together for 15 years. Life with Rob was generally peaceful. We lived in a decent house, had good jobs, and shared a bunch of common interests, but there was always something missing: a child. You see, we tried for years to get pregnant. We visited doctors, tried different treatments, and even considered adoption. But nothing worked. As time went on, the strain of our childless reality began to pull at our once strong bond. Arguments became frequent, and the future started to look a bit gloomy. But then, one day, something changed. It was a regular Wednesday morning. I woke up feeling a little queasy. Thinking it was something I ate, I brushed it off. But then I remembered I had missed my period. Could it be? I quickly rummaged through the bathroom cupboard and found a leftover pregnancy test from years ago. Without wasting a moment, I used it. Waiting for the result felt like the longest 3 minutes of my life. When I finally dared to look, it was positive. My heart raced. We were pregnant. The joy, the excitement, the fear, it all rushed in. I had to tell Rob. He was in the living room, engrossed in some paperwork. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to him, the test still in my hand. "Rob," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm pregnant." He looked up, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "Are you sure? I mean, at this age? Is it even safe?" I was taken aback. This wasn't the reaction I was expecting. "I took the test, Rob. It's positive." He sighed. "Anna, you know how hard it's been. And now, at 37, do you know the risks?" I felt a sting of hurt. "I thought you'd be happy," I whispered. "I am. I'm worried about you. About us," he replied, his voice softening a bit. "We've waited so long for this, Rob. We can't let fear dictate our happiness now," I countered. He looked down, avoiding my gaze. "Have you considered, maybe, not going through with it?" I couldn't believe my ears. Terminate the pregnancy? No, Rob. This might be our only chance. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our situation pressing down on both of us. I wanted him to be as overjoyed as I was, but at that moment, all I saw in his eyes was fear and uncertainty. That night, as we lay side by side in bed, I held on to hope. Hope that our child would bring us closer again. Hope that our love was strong enough to overcome any challenge. And above all, hope for the future. The next few months were tough. As days turned into weeks, it became clear that this pregnancy wasn't going to be easy. I was often sick, nauseated, and felt exhausted all the time. But each little kick from inside reminded me why it was all worth it. One day, after feeling particularly weak, I collapsed. Thankfully, Rob was home and immediately rushed me to the hospital. As I lay on the cold hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines, I felt more vulnerable than ever before. "Is she going to be okay?" I heard Rob ask Dr. Mitchell, his voice laced with worry. "She needs rest," Dr. Mitchell replied. "Her body is under a lot of strain due to the pregnancy. It's imperative that she stays relaxed and avoids any stress." That hospital stay was the first of many. Each time I was admitted, I'd watch Rob from the window, pacing back and forth in the hospital corridor, talking on the phone, sometimes even arguing with the billing department. One evening, as I lay in the hospital bed, Rob walked in with a weary look on his face. He looked like he hadn't slept for days. "I met with Dr. Mitchell," he began. "He said we need to consider the possibility of bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy." I nodded slowly. "If it's best for the baby, I'll do it." Rob sat down next to me, holding my hand. "I'm sorry, Anna. I wish I could do more to help." I squeezed his hand. "You're here with me. That's more than enough. However, as the days went by, Rob's visits became less frequent. Sometimes he'd call, other times he'd send a text saying he was caught up with work, but the distance between us seemed to be growing. During one of my longer hospital stays, I was feeling particularly low. Missing the comfort of my home, I asked a nurse if I could use the phone to call Rob. "It's been 3 days," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice when he answered. "You haven't visited." "I know, Anna. It's hard for me. Seeing you like this," he admitted. "Rob, I need you, now more than ever." Silence. "I'll try to come by tomorrow," he finally said, his voice distant. But tomorrow turned into the day after, and soon a week had passed. Feeling isolated and alone, I confided in my nurse, Lisa. "He's probably just scared," she suggested, trying to be comforting. Sometimes, when people can't handle situations, they distance themselves. One morning, after a particularly difficult night, Dr. Mitchell came into my room. "I think it's time we discuss the birth plan, Anna," he began cautiously. "There are some decisions to be made." Rob, despite his absences, was there for that discussion. We sat, hand in hand, listening to our options, praying for the strength to make the right choices. Days turned into weeks, and as the date approached, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. But I held on to hope, believing that once our child arrived, everything would fall into place. Little did I know, the hardest part of our journey was yet to come. The first moments of holding my daughter, Emma, in my arms were moments of pure bliss. Her tiny fingers, her soft cooing sounds, it felt like a dream. But that dream was quickly shattered by Dr. Mitchell's grim announcement. "Anna, Rob," he began with a heavy sigh, "there are some concerns regarding Emma's health. We've observed some abnormalities that suggest she might have a severe condition." Rob's face paled. "What are you talking about?" "We'll need to run more tests to be certain, but it's important you're both prepared," Dr. Mitchell replied, his voice gentle but firm. That evening, as I cradled Emma, Rob walked into the room, a storm brewing in his eyes. He looked at me, then at Emma, and took a deep breath. "Anna," he started, his voice shaking. "How could you? Giving birth at this age? We knew the risks." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Rob, I thought we wanted this. I thought we wanted a family." He was nearly shouting now. "You should have considered an abortion. Why bring a child into the world with so many complications? Because of your selfishness, we now have a possibly sick child to look after." I was shocked. "Rob, she's our daughter. We should be together in this, not pointing fingers." His face was red with anger. "I can't believe I'm in this situation. I can't raise a child with potential disabilities. It's not the life I imagined." As the weight of his words sank in, a cold dread filled my heart. "So, what are you saying?" Rob hesitated for a moment. "I don't think I can do this. I can't be here, not like this." It felt like the floor had been pulled from beneath me. "You're abandoning your daughter because she might be different?" He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I just can't handle it, Anna." Devastation turned into determination. "Fine. If you're leaving, then leave for good. But you'll have no claim over Emma." He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving me with our newborn daughter, grappling with the uncertainty of our future. Asterisk, asterisk. The first few weeks after Rob left were the hardest. The house felt empty, the silence was deafening, and the reality of being a single mother weighed heavily on me. But every time I looked into Emma's big, innocent eyes, I felt a surge of determination. I was going to make sure she had the best life possible, no matter what it took. My sister, Linda, was a godsend during this time. She came over often, helping with household chores and looking after Emma so I could rest. One evening, as I was feeding Emma, Linda walked in, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Anna," she began gently, "you need to think about the future. Have you considered finding a place of your own?" I sighed, looking around the home that held so many memories. "I've thought about it, but the thought of leaving this place, it's just hard." Linda took my hand. "I know, but think about Emma. This house will always remind you of Rob and everything that happened. You both deserve a fresh start." She was right. I needed to let go of the past and focus on building a new life for Emma and me. The search for a new place wasn't easy. With my limited savings and no job, options were limited. But then, one day, Linda called me excitedly. "Anna, you won't believe what I found. There's a small house for rent in my neighborhood. It's perfect for you and Emma." I went to see the house the very next day. It was a cozy 2-bedroom place with a small garden in the back. The landlord, Mrs. Peterson, was a kind, elderly lady who lived next door. "Linda speaks very highly of you," Mrs. Peterson said, smiling warmly. "The place is yours if you want it." I felt tears of gratitude welling up. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. This means so much to me." Moving in was hectic, but with Linda's help, we managed. As I set up Emma's room, filling it with toys and her tiny clothes, a sense of peace washed over me. This was our home, our sanctuary. Linda popped her head into the room. "How's it going in here?" I smiled, hugging Emma close. "It's perfect. I can't thank you enough." She hugged us both. "That's what family is for. You're not alone in this, Anna. Remember that." Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a new routine. Morning walks with Emma, visits to the local park, and coffee dates with Linda became our new normal. One day, as Emma and I were playing in the garden, Mrs. Peterson walked over, holding a tray of freshly baked cookies. "Thought you two could use a treat," she said, smiling. I smiled back, taking a cookie. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. It's delicious." She chuckled. "Call me Ellie. Feels strange being called Mrs. Peterson by my new neighbor." We chatted as Emma giggled and played. Ellie shared stories of her own children, offering advice and wisdom. I felt a connection, a sense of community that had been missing for so long. As the days went by, the pain of the past began to fade. With the support of my sister and new friends like Ellie, I realized that while one chapter of my life had closed, another, even more beautiful one, was just beginning. Emma's first birthday was just around the corner, and I was deep in preparations. Ellie and Linda offered their assistance, suggesting ideas for decorations and games. As the day drew nearer, I found myself reflecting on the whirlwind of the past year. My baby girl, Emma, was blossoming into a bubbly, inquisitive child, her laughter a constant source of joy. One afternoon, as I was laying Emma down for her nap, the phone rang. The sound was sharp and unexpected. "Hello?" "Hello, Anna," came the familiar voice. It was Dr. Mitchell. I felt a twinge of anxiety. "Dr. Mitchell, is there a problem?" He hesitated, which only deepened my concern. "Anna, I need you to come to the hospital. There's something about Emma we need to discuss." I felt my heart in my throat. "Is she okay?" His voice was thick with regret. "Please come in. We need to talk face to face." Linda agreed to watch Emma while I rushed to the hospital. The drive felt much longer than it was, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Dr. Mitchell greeted me in his office, his usually calm face lined with worry. "Anna, I'm so sorry to call you in this way." My patience was thinning. "What's going on?" Taking a deep breath, he began. "There's been a grave error. The initial tests we ran on Emma after her birth got mixed up with another baby's." My confusion grew. "Meaning?" He met my gaze, his eyes filled with regret. "Emma is healthy, Anna. She doesn't have any medical condition. I can't express how deeply sorry I am." The weight of his words hit me hard. "You mean to tell me I've lived this past year under false assumptions? My life turned upside down because of this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, and it's my responsibility. I can't begin to fathom the pain this has caused." I thought of Rob, of the bitterness and the pain. This mistake, it's shattered my life. Dr. Mitchell looked defeated. "I know words can't change the past, but I'll do everything I can to make it right." I took a moment to collect my thoughts. I need time to process this. Driving home, a mix of relief and fury consumed me. Yet, seeing Emma's joyful face as I walked in grounded me. She was my world, and she was okay. That night, Linda and I sat down, and I relayed everything. She was horrified. "Anna, what are you going to do?" I looked at Emma, peacefully sleeping. "For now, nothing. And I don't want Rob to know. He made his choice." Linda squeezed my hand. "You're strong, Anna. Remember, you're not alone in this." In the stillness of the night, I reflected on our journey. Yes, the revelation about Emma's health was bittersweet. But one thing was for sure. I would protect and cherish her, regardless of the past. The swift passage of time amazed me. Before I knew it, Emma was already 5 and gearing up for her first day of school. My feelings were a whirlwind of pride, hope, and the natural apprehension of a mother. At breakfast, a few days before school, Emma gazed at me, her eyes shimmering with anticipation. "Mom, will I be going to school like other kids?" I smiled warmly. "Yes, sweetie. In just a few days, you'll be starting." Her face lit up. "Will I find friends there? Will they like me?" Touched by her innocence, I assured her, "Emma, you're such a lovely girl. Of course, they'll adore you." On her first day, dressed in her new school uniform with a pink backpack hanging from her shoulders, Emma paused at the school gates. With a quiver in her voice, she admitted, "Mommy, I'm scared no one will talk to me." I crouched to her eye level. "Honey, always remember to be yourself. You're amazing, and they'll see that. Just give it some time." Her small hand waved goodbye as she joined the bustling crowd of students. I watched her until she was out of sight, my heart heavy with the typical worries of a parent. A few weeks later, Emma was all excitement and stories about her new friend Sophia. Their adventures during breaks, their shared love for painting, and their little secrets. One day, she bounced home asking, "Mom, can Sophia come over tomorrow?" Delighted at her blossoming friendship, I agreed. "Absolutely. I'm eager to meet your new buddy." The next afternoon was filled with their giggles and playful shouts. From the corner of my eye, I noticed their genuine bond and thought of how childhood friendships were so pure and uncomplicated. As the sun dipped, a car pulled up. Emma, holding Sophia's hand, led her to the door. To my shock, standing there were Rob and a young woman, presumably his new wife. "Emma, inside. Now." Rob's voice was curt. Sophia, sensing the tension, looked worriedly between her parents and me. "Daddy, I had so much fun. Emma's my best friend." Rob's gaze was cold. "Sophia, we've talked about this. You shouldn't play with ... inferior children." His voice dripped with disdain, making it clear whom he referred to. I felt a rush of anger. Before I could retort, the young woman, probably trying to mediate, gently tugged at Sophia's hand. "Come, dear, let's go home." Emma stood close to me, her eyes filled with confusion and hurt. As the car drove away, she whispered, "Mom, why did he say that?" Holding her close, I replied, "Sometimes, sweetie, people don't say the nicest things, but always remember, you're wonderful just the way you are." That evening, as I tucked Emma in, I promised myself that no matter what, I'd always protect her from the cruel judgments of the world. Only days after the incident, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered, "Hello?" A woman's voice, soft yet firm, responded, "Hi, this is Emily, Sophia's mother. Can we talk?" Surprised, I replied cautiously, "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated. "I'd rather discuss this face to face. Can we meet tomorrow? There's a cafe around the corner from your house." After a moment, I agreed. "All right, see you at 10 a.m.? The next morning, I saw Emily waiting. She looked out of place, her pristine appearance contrasting with the laid-back vibe of the cafe. As I approached, she stood up, offering a polite, if slightly forced, smile. "Thank you for coming," she began, her eyes searching mine. "After the other day, I couldn't shake off a nagging feeling that there's more to the story than Rob's told me." I took a deep breath. "I'm not one to spread tales, but since Sophia is involved, I think you should know." She leaned forward, anticipation evident. "Please, tell me everything." Over the next hour, I unfolded our past. How Rob and I had struggled with fertility, my unexpected pregnancy, his disinterest, the misdiagnosis, his leaving, and my subsequent journey with Emma. I made sure to be factual, not letting emotion color the narrative. Emily sat stunned. He never told me any of this. He said you were the one who left him, and he always painted such a rosy picture of your marriage. I shrugged. Sometimes people craft stories to cope, or to hide. She looked defeated. I feel like such a fool. I thought our love was genuine, but now it seems like he was just replacing one life with another. Emily, I started, my tone firm. It's not about him anymore. It's about Sophia and Emma. They've formed a bond. I don't want Emma to suffer because of our past. She nodded. I completely agree. Children shouldn't be dragged into adult disputes. As we parted, I felt a weight lifted. For the first time, I felt like I was truly free from Rob's shadow, having laid our past bare. That evening, as Emma played with her toys, she looked up. Mom, will I see Sophia again? Smiling, I said, Yes, sweetie, you will. And always remember, your past doesn't define your future, you do. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling me from my thoughts. Rob's name flashed on the screen, a name I hadn't expected to see in a long time. Hesitating for only a moment, I answered. Anna. Rob's voice was filled with a mix of anger and desperation. Do you have any idea what you've done? I frowned, taken aback. What are you talking about? Emily left me, he spat out bitterly. She filed for divorce, and she's taken everything. I've lost almost everything, Anna, and it's all because she spoke to you. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Rob, you made your choices. I just told her the truth. There was a heavy pause. She also told me about Emma, that she's healthy. You never told me. Why would I? After everything you said, after everything you did, you didn't deserve to know, I retorted. Rob's voice grew softer, almost pleading. Anna, I made a mistake. I realize that now. I want to be there for Emma. I want to be there for you. We can be a family again. I scoffed in disbelief. Now that your life's in shambles, you suddenly want us back? You're unbelievable, Rob. Anna, I know I messed up, but I've changed. Please, give me a chance. I could feel anger rising in me. You walked out on us, Rob. You called our daughter inferior and turned your back. Now that your little fairy tale with Emily has ended, you think you can just waltz back into our lives? Think again. He sounded desperate now. I was wrong, Anna. I see that now. Can't you give me another chance? No, I replied firmly. Emma and I have moved on. We're doing just fine without you, and we don't need or want you in our lives. But Anna... It's over, Rob. Goodbye. I ended the call, my heart racing. I took a deep breath, letting the emotions wash over me. Emma and I had each other, and that was all that mattered. I wouldn't let Rob's selfishness disrupt our peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. From the moment I met Jake, I knew our lives would be a roller coaster. I was always the type to plan everything out. By the time I turned 28, I had a stable job as a lawyer, a nice apartment, and a clear idea of where I wanted my life to go. Financial stability was important to me, and I prided myself on my ability to manage my finances. Jake, on the other hand, was a whirlwind. The first time we met, he had this infectious energy about him that drew me in. He was a tall man with messy brown hair and a carefree smile that could melt anyone's heart. We met at a mutual friend's party. I was discussing a recent case I had won at work, and Jake walked over, drink in hand. So, you're the famous lawyer Rachel everyone's talking about, he said with a smirk. I raised an eyebrow. And who might you be? The guy who's about to change your life. He winked. Laughing, I replied, That's a bold statement, but sure, I'll bite. Tell me, how do you plan on doing that? Over the next few hours, we talked about everything, from our childhood memories to our future dreams. He told me about his love for adventure and how he often went on spontaneous trips just because he felt like it. He said he believed in living in the moment and enjoying every second of life. I found his perspective refreshing. Here I was, someone who always planned ahead, and then there was Jake, someone who took each day as it came. Over the next few months, our relationship blossomed. He introduced me to a world of spontaneity, and I brought a bit of order to his chaos. Our dates were always full of surprises. One day, he would take me out for a fancy dinner, and the next, we would be on a random road trip to nowhere. It wasn't just the fun times that made me fall for him. It was also the way he cared for me. He would always make sure I was okay, and he had this unique ability to make me feel special. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find my apartment filled with candles and roses. Jake stood in the middle of the room, a huge grin on his face. "Thought you could use a little pick-me-up," he said. I smiled. "You always know how to make a bad day better." We settled into a routine, and before I knew it, we were talking about moving in together and even getting married. Our relationship had its challenges, especially when it came to our different views on money. I was always careful with my spending, while Jake was more impulsive. "Come on, let's just book that trip to Europe," he would often say. I would reply, "We need to plan it out, Jake. We can't just spend without thinking." He would just roll his eyes. "You worry too much." Despite our differences, we loved each other deeply. So, when he proposed, I said yes without hesitation. I believed that love could overcome any obstacle, and I was ready to start a new chapter of my life with Jake. Meeting the in-laws is always a nerve-wracking experience, but when Jake asked me to join a family dinner, I wasn't just nervous, I was curious. I had already heard snippets about Jake's family and their money habits, and I was eager to get the full picture. Their house was a large, sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. As we drove up the long driveway, I noticed the numerous cars parked outside, many of which looked brand new. As we entered, I was greeted with a loud cheer from Jake's relatives. They were a lively bunch, and the house was filled with laughter and chatter. Jake's mother, Linda, was a petite woman with a warm smile. She hugged me tightly and said, "It's so good to finally meet you." I smiled back. "Thank you for having me." Jake's father, Mark, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a booming voice. "So, you're the lawyer who's captured our Jake's heart," he chuckled, shaking my hand firmly. "It seems that way," I laughed. Dinner was a grand affair. The table was laden with dishes, and wine glasses clinked cheerfully. As we ate, I observed the dynamics of Jake's family. They talked about their recent purchases and the vacations they had been on, or were planning to go on. Money seemed to flow freely in their conversations, and I got the sense that they didn't think twice before spending. Linda mentioned a recent shopping spree in Paris. Mark spoke of a new business venture that required a significant investment. Their younger daughter, Sarah, excitedly chatted about her plans to study abroad. At one point, Jake's older sister, Emily, turned to me. "So, how do you manage your finances? Being a lawyer, you must be earning a lot." I hesitated for a moment before answering. "I try to save and invest wisely. It's important to have a financial safety net." Jake jumped in. "She's the practical one in our relationship." Emily laughed. "Sounds like you two balance each other out." The evening went on, and I could feel the difference in our lifestyles. While I was always cautious about spending, Jake's family seemed to have a live for today mentality. It was clear that they enjoyed the finer things in life and didn't hesitate to indulge. As the night drew to a close, Linda pulled me aside. "You know, dear," she began, "Jake is lucky to have you, but do let him have his fun. Money is meant to be enjoyed." I nodded politely. "Of course. I just believe in being careful." She patted my hand. "Balance is key." As Jake and I drove back home, the weight of our differences hung in the air. I turned to him. "Your family is lovely, but we have very different views on money." Jake sighed. "I know, but love is about compromise, right?" I smiled. "Yes, but compromise doesn't mean losing oneself." Jake reached over and squeezed my hand. "We'll figure it out." But deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling that our financial differences, combined with the influence of Jake's family, would soon lead to challenges that neither of us were prepared for. And so it happened. We were barely through the front door when the tension in Jake's family home became apparent. The large living room, which I remembered as a place of laughter and chatter during our last visit, was now filled with anxious faces. Everyone was there. Jake's parents, his siblings, and most notably, his younger brother Ryan. I had always found Ryan a bit unpredictable. He was the sort of person who took chances, always believing the next big break was just around the corner. That day, he looked restless, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding direct contact. Without much preamble, Linda, Jake's mother, began, "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have a serious situation on our hands." Ryan, with a sigh, came forward. "I messed up. I owe the bank $100,000. They're saying they'll take legal action if I don't pay soon." The room erupted in a flurry of questions and exclaims. Jake's hand tightened around mine. He looked more shocked than anyone. Mark, Jake's father, rubbed his temples. "Ryan, we always warned you about getting involved in those sketchy deals." Ryan snapped back. "I thought they were good investments." Seeing where the discussion might be heading, Linda tried to refocus the group. "The blame game won't help. We need to find a solution." Emily, Jake's sister, interjected, "Why don't we all chip in? If we pool our resources, we might cover most of it." Mark sighed. "Most of our money is tied up. We can't pull out that kind of cash right now." Then, all eyes turned to me. I felt trapped, like a deer in headlights. I sensed what was coming next. Jake, squeezing my hand tighter, spoke up. "You've got savings, right? We can use that to help Ryan out." I looked at him in disbelief. Was he seriously suggesting this? Linda's eyes brightened. "Oh, that would be wonderful. Can you help, dear?" I tried to remain calm. "Jake, we've talked about being careful with our finances. My savings are for our future." Jake's face reddened. "This is family. Don't you care about my brother?" Ryan nodded. "Yeah, aren't we supposed to be family now? Or does money matter more to you?" Feeling cornered, I replied, "I understand this is a tough situation, but why should I hand over my hard-earned savings when there might be other solutions? Maybe I can help negotiate with the bank? Work out a plan?" Jake's voice grew louder. "This isn't the time for legal advice. Ryan needs help now." Linda chimed in, with an edge to her voice. "We thought family meant something to you. Guess we were wrong." The room felt stifling, the weight of their expectations and accusations pressing down on me. I had hoped Jake would be my ally, but he seemed to have chosen his family's side. The meeting ended with no resolution. As Jake and I walked back to the car, I felt a chasm growing between us. The dawning light had always been a comforting sight, but this morning, its warmth was overshadowed by a chilling discovery. Glancing at my phone, I saw an alarming bank notification. My heart thudded heavily as I saw the staggering amount. $150,000 had been transferred out of my savings, and even more shockingly, it had been sent to Jake's account. Confusion and dread wrapped around me. This couldn't be right. Without hesitation, I tried calling Jake, but he didn't answer. I sent a message. "Jake, why is there $150,000 transferred to your account? We need to talk. Now." Time ticked by, and every silent moment only amplified my anxiety. He didn't respond. The swirling unease forced me into action, and I decided to confront him at his workplace. As I approached his office, I saw his empty desk. One of his colleagues, Sarah, looked up and said, "Looking for Jake? He's taken the day off. Some personal matters," he mentioned. I muttered a thanks, my thoughts racing even faster now. With growing dread, I decided to go to his parents' place. Perhaps they knew something, or perhaps they could get Jake to talk to me. The large wooden door of their house looked more imposing than ever. I knocked assertively. After a brief moment, Linda, Jake's mother, opened the door just a crack. Her guarded expression told me she was aware of something. "I need to speak to Jake," I demanded. Linda glanced behind her, hesitating. "Jake isn't here," she replied. "Where is he? He's taken a huge amount from our joint savings. I need answers." Her face remained passive. "I don't know about any money," she claimed, but her eyes darted away. "Let me in. We need to discuss this," I insisted. But instead of yielding, she firmly stated, "I think it's best if you leave," and shut the door in my face. The blatant act left me stunned. Standing there, I realized the gravity of the betrayal. They knew, and they were covering for him. The reception area of the police station was bustling. Uniformed officers moved to and fro, the hum of conversation punctuated by the ring of phones. I approached the front desk, where an officer sat, looking engrossed in paperwork. "Excuse me," I began, my voice slightly shaky. "I need to report a significant unauthorized transaction from my bank account. It's my husband." The officer, whose name tag read Perez, looked up, her eyes filled with understanding. "Take a seat." She gestured to the chairs nearby. "I'll call someone to assist you." Sitting down, my thoughts swirled. Was I really about to report my own husband? Before I could contemplate further, a tall officer approached me. "Mrs. Collins?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, that's me." "I'm Officer Daniels. Officer Perez informed me about your situation. Let's go to my office where we can talk." We walked down a corridor, and he gestured to a chair opposite his desk. As I explained the situation to him, I noticed his brows furrow in concern. "So, you believe your husband took this money without your consent?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yes, and his family seems to be in on it. They shut me out when I went to confront them." Officer Daniels jotted down notes. "Do you have any evidence of this transaction?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the bank notification and the message I had sent Jake, as well as his vague reply. Officer Daniels looked at the screen, his expression serious. "This certainly helps, but it's going to be a complicated case, given that he's your husband. Do you wish to press charges?" Taking a deep breath, I responded, "Yes, I do. I feel betrayed and violated. I need to stand up for myself." He nodded. "I understand. We'll start the process. It may take time, but we'll support you every step of the way." "Thank you," I whispered, tears threatening to spill. Officer Daniels extended a comforting hand. "It's tough, I know, but you're doing the right thing. We'll get to the bottom of this." The courtroom was a daunting place, its high ceilings echoing the whispers of the people inside. Rows of wooden benches filled with friends, family, reporters, and strangers who had taken an interest in the case. The tension was palpable. I sat on one side, dressed conservatively, my best friend Sarah by my side for support. Across the room, Jake sat with his parents. He avoided making eye contact with me. The judge, a stern-looking woman with gray hair tied back neatly, cleared her throat, signaling the start of the proceedings. "Order in the court," she declared. The prosecution began by detailing the charges against Jake: the unauthorized transaction, the evasion when confronted, and the role of Jake's family in possibly abetting the crime. It was painful to relive the betrayal as the evidence was presented. Bank statements, my call records, and the security footage from Jake's parents' home on the day I confronted them. Then it was Jake's turn to testify. He stood, looking much smaller than I remembered. "Your Honor, I admit to transferring the money, but I did it out of desperation. My family was drowning in debt. I thought if I took the money, it would fix everything. I planned to return it." I clenched my fists. He was playing the victim card. The prosecutor spoke up. "Mr. Collins, did you discuss this with your wife before taking such a drastic step?" Jake hesitated. "No, I thought she wouldn't understand." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "So, you decided stealing was the better option?" Jake lowered his gaze. "I made a mistake." The trial went on for hours. Witnesses were called, statements were read. When the time came for me to testify, I felt a lump in my throat. With every ounce of strength, I recounted the events, the betrayal, the pain of being shut out by someone I had once loved. Sarah was called up next. She spoke of my character, my hard work, my dedication to building a life with Jake, and the anguish I had experienced when discovering the betrayal. When the closing statements were made, the room held its collective breath. The judge, after taking her time, declared, "Mr. Collins, you've admitted to your crime, and while I understand your intent was not malicious, the act was a clear violation of trust. You will return the full amount of $150,000 to Mrs. Collins immediately and pay an additional fine for this unauthorized transaction." Jake's face went pale. His parents seemed equally shocked. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I advise both parties to consider mediation to resolve any personal disputes." As I left the courtroom, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but at what cost? The man I had once dreamt of building a life with was now a stranger, a criminal in my eyes. After the court proceedings, my mind kept going back to one thing. How did Jake's family end up in such a mess in the first place? And why was I, a mere bystander in their family affairs, paying the price? My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to find out the root cause. The first person I thought to reach out to was Amanda, Jake's ex-girlfriend from before we met. She had once mentioned how Jake's family had a penchant for shady dealings. Back then, I had dismissed her words as jealousy, but now I wondered if there was some truth to it. I dialed her number, half expecting her not to pick up, but she did. Hello? Hey, Amanda, it's Rachel. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to talk. She paused, then replied, About Jake? Yes. We met up at a quiet coffee shop the next day. Amanda looked different, more mature and composed than I remembered. After exchanging pleasantries, I got straight to the point. Amanda, you once told me about Jake's family, about their dealings. I need to know more. She sighed, taking a sip of her coffee. I wondered when you'd ask. Jake's family has been involved in some sketchy businesses for years. Loan sharking, shady investments, you name it. They've always been about quick money. I frowned, but Jake never seemed that way. At least, not when we were dating. Amanda shook her head. He tried to distance himself from it, but family ties run deep. And when his brother got into that massive debt, he got sucked right back in. My heart sank. So, all this time? She nodded. He's been trying to bail them out. I warned you, remember? I saw the signs, the desperation, the sneaky phone calls, but you were too in love to see. I stared down, fighting back tears. I can't believe I was so naive. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You're not the first, and won't be the last. They're masters of manipulation. The conversation shifted, and I learned that Jake's brother had a gambling problem. The debts weren't from a failed business or medical emergency. They were from nights spent at underground gambling dens and high-stakes poker games. I thanked Amanda for her honesty and clarity. As I walked back to my car, everything made sense. The secrecy, the desperation, the betrayal. Jake's family was drowning, and in their desperation, they tried to drag me down with them. After the dust settled, one thing was clear to me. I needed to put the past firmly behind me. The first step was finalizing the divorce from Jake. It was a relatively quick process, given the circumstances. My lawyer, an old friend from law school, ensured that it went smoothly without me having to face Jake again. One evening, after a long day at work, I met up with some college friends for dinner. Sarah, always the one with the latest gossip, leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You remember Jake's brother, right? Heard he's been locked up for fraud. I raised an eyebrow. You're kidding. She shook her head. Wish I was. Multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. They say he'd been scamming people for years. Anna chimed in. And that's not all. Jake's parents' property? Seized and auctioned off to clear their mounting debts. I took a deep breath, processing the information. It's just sad. That family had so many issues, so many problems. Sarah squeezed my hand. You dodged a bullet, girl, and look at you now, moving on, living your best life. I smiled, grateful for the support. Thanks, Sarah. It's been a journey, but I'm finding my way. Life continued. Days turned into weeks, and then months. The wounds of the past slowly began to heal, and I started building a life that was truly mine. One evening, as I was settling down with a book, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. I answered cautiously. Hello? Hey, it's Jake, came the hesitant voice. A chill ran down my spine. What do you want? He cleared his throat. Look, I know I've done wrong. I'm in a tough spot right now, financially. I was wondering if... No. I cut him off sharply. But I just need a little help to... No, Jake. You and your family have taken enough from me. I owe you nothing. I replied, my voice cold and firm. There was silence on the other end. Then, a soft, defeated, all right. I ended the call, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. But mostly, I felt relief. Relief that I had moved on, that I was no longer entangled in their web of deceit and drama. Over time, I immersed myself in work and spent quality time with friends and family who genuinely cared about me. I learned to value and trust myself more than ever, firmly believing that no matter what life threw my way, I would always come out stronger on the other side. The first time I laid eyes on Michael was at a college seminar. We were both there for extra credits, though our paths were quite different. He was a business major while I was pursuing literature. I was drawn to him from the moment he raised his hand and posed a challenging question to the professor. After class, we found ourselves at the same coffee shop, and from there, it just seemed like the universe wanted us to be together. We chatted about everything, from college, hobbies, to our childhood memories. "I come from a pretty strict background," he mentioned, taking a sip from his cup. "My parents are deeply religious." I remember shrugging. "So? My parents are free thinkers. They always taught me to question everything." Michael laughed. "Sounds like we're from different planets." But despite our differences, there was an undeniable chemistry. We began to see each other more frequently, studying together and exploring the city during the weekends. About 2 years into our relationship, we decided to move in together. It was a practical decision. Our apartments were far from the university, and sharing a place made sense. Plus, we were inseparable by then. However, when Michael broke the news to his parents, it wasn't received well. At a dinner at their house, Mrs. Davis, Michael's mother, was the first to voice her concerns. "Living together before marriage? Michael, you know how we feel about that." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mom, times have changed. It's not a big deal." Mr. Davis chimed in. "In our house it is. You're living in sin." I could feel the weight of their stares. Wanting to ease the tension, I said, "We respect your beliefs, but this is our decision. We're adults." Mrs. Davis sighed. "It's just not the way we raised you." Michael took my hand. "Lizzie and I love each other. We want to start our life together, and I hope you can support that." The evening ended on a somber note, but Michael and I were firm in our decision. We found a cozy apartment close to campus and moved in. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Our bond grew stronger, but the strain with his parents was always in the background, like an old radio playing a sad tune. One evening, as we were settling into our new life, there was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Davis, holding a pie. "I thought I'd come by and see how you two are doing," she said, looking around with a critical eye. "We're doing great, Mrs. Davis," I replied, trying to be cordial. She sat down, placing the pie on the table. "This is all temporary, right? You'll get married soon?" Michael cleared his throat. "We haven't decided that yet, Mom." As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the constant pressure from Michael's parents started to weigh on us. Our once carefree dates and movie nights began to have a shadow, the looming expectation of marriage. One evening, while we were making dinner together in our tiny kitchen, Michael broached the subject. "Lizzie, have you ever thought about, having a wedding?" I looked up from chopping the vegetables, surprised. "Like, for us? Are you proposing?" He smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Not exactly. I mean, yes, I want to marry you someday, but right now, it's more about my parents. Maybe if we had a ceremony, they'd back off." I sighed. "So you're saying a wedding without the legal paperwork?" He nodded. "Just a thought. We can invite friends, make it a fun day. My parents get their wedding, and we get some peace." It wasn't the romantic proposal I'd imagined, but I understood his reasoning. "All right," I said slowly, "but on one condition. We do it our way. No big church wedding, just something small and intimate." Michael grinned, relief evident on his face. "Deal." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. We chose a beautiful outdoor venue, invited our close friends and family, and planned a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When we broke the news to his parents, their reaction was surprisingly subdued. "An outdoor wedding?" Mrs. Davis asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, it's unconventional, But if it means you two are taking the next step, I suppose we can support it." Mr. Davis added, "As long as you're committed to each other, that's what matters." The day of the wedding was sunny and bright. I wore a simple white dress, and Michael looked dashing in his suit. Our friends cheered, and even Michael's parents seemed genuinely happy. During the reception, Mrs. Davis pulled me aside. "Lizzie, I want to apologize," she began, her voice soft. "I know we've been hard on you two, but seeing you together today, I realized that love is what truly matters." I smiled, touched by her words. "Thank you, Mrs. Davis. That means a lot." The day ended on a high note, with everyone dancing and celebrating our love. It felt like we had finally won Michael's parents over, and I hoped this would be a fresh start for us. But as days passed, their daily visits began. They'd drop by unannounced, often with unsolicited advice or thinly veiled criticisms. It was as if the wedding had given them a free pass to interfere in our lives. One evening, as Michael and I were unwinding after a long day, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Mrs. Davis holding a casserole dish. "Just thought I'd drop off some dinner," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks," I replied, taking the dish. "But you know, you don't have to do this." She waved a hand dismissively. "It's no trouble. I just thought, since you're always so busy, you might not have time to cook." I forced a smile, sensing the underlying judgment. "We manage, but thanks anyway." As the door closed, I sighed deeply. Michael wrapped an arm around me. "It'll be okay," he whispered. It started with the subtle comments, the not-so-innocent questions. "Why is the house so messy?" Or, "Have you considered cooking something more nutritious?" Mrs. Davis would ask, her tone dripping with faux concern. One day, I came home from work, exhausted, to find her in our living room, reorganizing our bookshelves. "Mrs. Davis, what are you doing?" I asked, taken aback. She looked up, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Just thought I'd help tidy up a bit. These shelves looked so cluttered." Michael entered from the kitchen, holding 2 cups of tea. "Mom's just helping out, Lizzie," he said, trying to play mediator. I took a deep breath, my patience waning. "This is our home, Michael. We didn't ask for help." Mrs. Davis pursed her lips, her eyes watering. "I'm just trying to be helpful. After all, now we're family." Days like these became more frequent. They'd pop by without notice, giving advice we never asked for, criticizing decisions we'd made together as a couple. It was clear they no longer saw boundaries. One evening, after a particularly trying visit from his parents, Michael and I sat down for a heart-to-heart. "Michael, this has to stop," I began, my voice trembling with frustration. "I can't live like this, feeling like I'm constantly being judged in my own home." He ran his fingers through his hair, looking equally stressed. "I know, Lizzie, it's just, they're my parents. I don't know how to tell them to back off without hurting their feelings." I replied, "But what about our feelings, our peace of mind? We can't keep sacrificing that for them." A week later, we invited them over for dinner, deciding to address the issue head-on. The evening started off pleasantly enough. We chatted about work, friends, and the latest news. But as the main course was served, I took a deep breath and dove in. "Mrs. Davis, Mr. Davis, we invited you over because there's something we need to discuss," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Davis looked up, his fork pausing mid-air. "What's the matter?" I exchanged a glance with Michael, who nodded in encouragement. "It's about the frequent visits and, well, the constant input on our lives." Mrs. Davis looked taken aback. "We're just trying to help." Michael took over. "Mom, Dad, we appreciate that you care, but it's becoming overwhelming. We need some space to live our lives, make our mistakes, and grow together." Tears formed in Mrs. Davis's eyes. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Mr. Davis added, his voice stern. "We're just looking out for you. It seems Lizzie here doesn't appreciate family." I felt a pang of guilt, but stood my ground. It's not about appreciation. It's about respect, respecting our boundaries and our choices. The room grew silent, the tension palpable. Mrs. Davis dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her shoulders shaking. We just wanted to be part of your lives. I never thought it'd come to this." Michael looked torn, his loyalty divided, but he held firm. "Mom, we love you, but this is our life. We need you to understand that." The evening ended with Mrs. Davis in tears, Mr. Davis looking disappointed, and an unspoken agreement that things had to change. As they left, I felt a mix of relief and dread, wondering what the future held for our relationships. Days after the confrontation, the house felt unusually quiet. The constant visits had stopped, but the silence was both a relief and a curse. Every time the doorbell rang or there was a knock, my heart would race, expecting it to be Michael's parents. But it never was. One evening, as Michael and I sat on our couch, he broached the topic. "Lizzie, do you think we were too harsh? I mean, they're my parents. Maybe we overreacted?" I took his hand, feeling its warmth. "Michael, it's not about being harsh. It's about setting boundaries. We did what we had to do." He sighed deeply. "I know, it's just hard. I never imagined being in this situation with them." As days turned into weeks, we began to feel the weight of our decision. There were no more surprise visits, but there were also no calls or messages. It was as if we had cut ties completely. During this period, I often found solace in browsing property listings online. One day, as I was scrolling through, a beautiful house in a neighboring town caught my eye. It had a large garden, a spacious living area, and most importantly, it was far away from our current life. "Michael, come look at this," I called out. He joined me, peering at the screen. "Wow, it's beautiful. But why are you looking at houses?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I was thinking, maybe it's time for a fresh start, somewhere new, where we can create our own memories, away from all this drama. He looked surprised. "You mean move? Leave everything behind?" I nodded. "It's drastic, I know, but maybe it's what we need." We discussed it at length, weighing the pros and cons. The idea of starting anew was enticing, but also terrifying. Yet, the more we talked, the more it felt right. A few weeks later, we visited the house. It was even more beautiful in person, and the neighborhood seemed perfect. After much consideration, I decided to use the money I had inherited from my grandmother to buy it. The day we signed the papers, I felt a mix of emotions. Excitement for the new beginning, but also sadness for what we were leaving behind. The move went smoothly, and soon we were settling into our new home. It felt like a dream. The peace and quiet were just what we needed. One evening, as we were enjoying a quiet dinner in our new dining room, Michael said, "Lizzie, I think this was the best decision we ever made." I smiled, feeling content. I think so too. The first few months in our new home were like a dream. The mornings were quiet, filled with the chirping of birds, and the evenings brought a calm, tranquil energy. Michael and I fell into a comfortable routine, enjoying the privacy and peace that our new surroundings provided. The past seemed like a distant memory, and the tension that once surrounded our lives had all but disappeared. Until one fateful day. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when the doorbell rang. Michael went to answer it. I heard murmurs, and then a familiar voice. My heart sank. It was Mrs. Davis. I walked to the entrance, my face revealing my shock. There they were, Mrs. and Mr. Davis, suitcases in tow, standing at our doorstep. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" Michael asked, his voice filled with surprise. Mrs. Davis smiled, a bit too sweetly. "We missed you, dear, and we thought, why not pay a visit?" I tried to keep my composure. "It's unexpected." Mr. Davis chimed in. "We just wanted to see where our son is living now. Is that so wrong?" Michael seemed torn. "Of course not, but a heads up would have been nice." Mrs. Davis looked around, her eyes scanning our home. "Oh, what a lovely place you have here. Much nicer than the old one." I bristled but said nothing. The visit turned into a stay. One night became 2, then 3. They began to settle in, making themselves comfortable, much like they had in our previous home. One evening, after dinner, I pulled Michael aside. "Michael, we can't go down this road again. We moved to escape this." He sighed. I know, Lizzie, but they're my parents. I can't just throw them out. Then what? Let them take over our lives again? Mrs. Davis, who seemed to have overheard our conversation, walked over, her eyes welling up with tears. Is that how you feel, Michael? That we're a burden? Michael looked helplessly at me, then back at his mother. Mom, it's not like that. We just wish you had told us you were coming. She sniffled. We just wanted to be close to our son, but it seems we're not welcome here either. I had a sinking feeling when I heard Michael's parents mention they'd made a decision about their living situation. The two of us had recently been discussing the matter privately, hoping to find a delicate way to address the issue. Now, it seemed the matter was going to be thrust into the open. Lizzie, Michael, Mr. Davis began, we have some news. Michael shifted in his seat, already sensing what was coming. Go on, he prompted. Mrs. Davis, trying to sound cheerful, said, We've sold our house. We realize there's no need for it when we have such a lovely family home here with you two. My eyes widened in shock. You did what? We wanted to be closer to you both, Mr. Davis explained, looking earnest. Mrs. Davis looked hurt. We are family. Why wouldn't you want us here? I took a deep breath and said what I'd wanted to say for a long time. This house, it's mine. It's not owned jointly by Michael and me. It's in my name only. I retrieved a file from the study, showing them the ownership documents. Mrs. Davis looked at the papers and then back at me, clearly stunned. But, you're married. What's yours is Michael's and vice versa. I smiled triumphantly. That's where you're mistaken. We held a wedding ceremony, yes, but Michael and I never legally married. We never signed any official documents, so, technically, you're not my in-laws. The weight of my words seemed to hang in the air. Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade paler, her eyes widening in disbelief. Mr. Davis looked from me to Michael, seeking some form of denial. Michael took my hand, signaling his support. It's true, Mom and Dad. We thought you'd be more accepting if we had a ceremony, but we never felt the need to get the state involved in our relationship. Mrs. Davis began to sob. So, you deceived us? And now you're throwing us out? The room was heavy with tension after the bombshells were dropped. Michael's parents were clearly taken aback, but it wasn't long before the shock turned into outrage. So, you tricked everyone with a sham wedding? And you think that makes everything all right? Mrs. Davis's voice had a hint of venom. Michael sighed. It wasn't about tricking anyone. It was about the way we wanted to live our lives. The ceremony was for us, and those who wanted to celebrate our love. Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade redder. You dare defy the sanctity of marriage, live together in sin, and then mock us with a fake wedding. I've had enough, Mr. Davis declared, standing up suddenly. You, young lady, are nothing but a sinner and a witch, trying to pull my son away from his family, his values. I was taken aback by the fierceness of their reaction, but I wouldn't let them intimidate me. I have not taken Michael from anyone. He's made his own choices, and it's high time you respect them. Mrs. Davis's eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was stern. Michael, come home with us. Leave this woman. She's done nothing but pull you into her web of deceit. Michael, ever the calm in the storm, replied, Mom, Dad, I love you both, but my place is here, with her. She's been nothing but kind and understanding, even when you both haven't been. You can't just demand I leave her. You're choosing her over us? Mr. Davis's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. I'm choosing to live my life on my terms, Michael asserted. The room went silent for what felt like an eternity. The air was thick, every breath heavy. Mrs. Davis's face was a mask of hurt and betrayal. Very well, she said, her voice cold. But remember this, you're turning your back on your family, on your faith, all for her. I'm not turning my back on anyone, Michael said. I just wish you'd see that. Mrs. Davis's eyes were hard, her voice bitter. Let's go, she said to her husband, not giving either of us another glance. And with that, they left, leaving behind a wake of hurt, confusion, and uncertainty. I looked at Michael, his face a mirror of my own feelings. We both knew that things had changed irrevocably, and there was no going back. A few days after the confrontation, as I was heading back from work, my neighbor, Mrs. Carlson, called out to me. She was an older lady, known for her daily walks and her uncanny ability to know everyone's business. "Did you hear about the Davis family not selling their house?" she asked with a knowing look. I paused, taken aback. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They never put their house on the market. I heard from Susan, who heard from Janice, who works at the town's real estate office. There's no record of the Davis property being up for sale." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Were they lying to us all this time? When I got home, I shared the information with Michael. He looked shocked. "I can't believe they'd lie to us. What were they trying to achieve?" We both knew the answer. They wanted to manipulate the situation to their advantage. The realization was a hard pill to swallow. All this time, while we tried to understand and accommodate them, they had been playing a game. Michael sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. This changes things. It's one thing to have disagreements, but outright deception? That's something else entirely. We can't keep letting them pull us into their manipulative games, I said firmly. We need boundaries, strong ones. Michael nodded. You're right. We can't continue like this. It's unhealthy for us and for our relationship. The next day, he went over to his parents' house. He needed to confront them, get some answers. When he returned, his face was a mix of anger and sadness. They admitted it, he began, his voice heavy. They thought that if they moved in with us, we'd be a proper family again. They felt threatened by our independence. We sat down, discussing our next steps. It was clear that for our own sanity and the health of our relationship, we needed distance from them. We need a break, Michael declared. Some time away from all this drama and manipulation. I agreed. It's the best decision for us right now. That evening, we sent a message to his parents, informing them of our decision. The reply was filled with anger and accusations, but we remained firm. We needed this, for ourselves and for our future. The next few weeks were quiet. We focused on each other, rebuilding the trust and closeness that had been strained over the past months. One evening, as we sat on our porch, looking at the stars, Michael turned to me. "Thank you," he whispered, "for standing by me, for fighting for us." I smiled, squeezing his hand. Always. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it was a poignant reminder of the importance of boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect in any relationship. As the night deepened, we looked towards the future, hoping for peace and understanding.
I grew up knowing Lucas, mostly from a distance. We were from the same neighborhood, and our paths often crossed on the street, but our worlds were vastly different. I came from a simple family. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Lucas, on the other hand, was part of the well-known Grayson family, who owned the largest company in town. Everyone knew them, and almost everyone envied them. One day, as I was walking home from my job at the local grocery store, Lucas approached me. It was unexpected. We barely spoke before this. "Hey, Tiffany," he greeted, flashing a smile that made many girls in our town go weak in the knees. "Hi, Lucas," I replied, a bit surprised. "How are you?" "Good, thanks. Look, I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee tomorrow." The invite took me off guard. "Coffee? With you?" "Yeah, I mean, we've known each other for years, but never really talked. I'd like to change that. What do you say?" I hesitated, then said, "All right, why not?" From that day, things moved quickly. Our coffee date turned into dinners, movie nights, and long walks. We spent days getting to know each other. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized we had a lot in common. One evening, as we were walking by the river, Lucas turned to me and said, "Tiffany, these past few weeks with you have been amazing. I've never felt this way about anyone before." I looked up at him. "Lucas, this is all so new to me. I never expected any of this." He took my hands in his. "Neither did I. But now that we're here, I don't want to let you go." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Before I knew it, Lucas was on one knee holding out a simple ring. "Tiffany, will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes. "Yes, Lucas. Yes, I will." The news of our engagement spread quickly. Everyone was surprised. No one saw it coming. But here we were, two people from different worlds, finding love in the most unexpected place. As the wedding preparations began, I couldn't help but feel like I was living in a dream. The Grayson family was beyond supportive. They welcomed me with open arms, especially Lucas's mother, Mrs. Harriet Grayson. She was thrilled about our union and took charge of most of the wedding arrangements. "Tiffany," she said to me one day, "I want you to have the best wedding. You're going to be a Grayson now." "Thank you, Mrs. Grayson. I never imagined any of this," I replied, overwhelmed. "You deserve it, dear. Lucas is lucky to have you." The big day arrived sooner than we expected. As I stood at the altar, looking at Lucas, I felt grateful for this unexpected turn my life had taken. Little did I know, things were about to change in ways I could never have anticipated. The move to our new home was swift, just days after our wedding. It was a quaint, charming place, not too large, with a hint of vintage charm. Lucas had picked it out, saying it was perfect for us to start our life together. From the moment we stepped in, I felt an unexpected chill, not from the house itself, but from Lucas. The warmth he had exuded throughout our courtship seemed to evaporate. Our rooms echoed with silence, broken only by the mundane conversations about household chores or grocery lists. One evening, after setting up the dinner table, I tried initiating a light conversation. "The house feels cozy, doesn't it? We can maybe get some plants for the balcony?" Lucas, who was absorbed in some paperwork, merely grunted in reply. Sensing his detachment, I attempted to bridge the distance. "Lucas, is everything okay?" He looked up, seemingly irritated. "Yes, why wouldn't it be?" "I just feel you've been distant since we moved in." I hesitated. "Did I do something wrong?" He sighed heavily, avoiding eye contact. "It's nothing. I'm just busy with work." "But you're always here, at home, with me," I pointed out, trying to understand his sudden change. Lucas's voice hardened. "Look, Tiffany, I have a lot on my mind. The marriage, the house, my work responsibilities. It's all a bit overwhelming." I felt a pang in my heart. "I thought we were in this together," I murmured. He didn't respond, just got up and headed to our bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the now cold dinner. The days that followed were no different. Mornings were a hurried affair, with Lucas often leaving before I was even fully awake. Evenings were cold and silent. I tried engaging him, suggesting we go out or inviting friends over, but he always had an excuse. Mrs. Harriet Grayson, during one of her visits, sensed the tension. "Tiffany," she whispered, pulling me aside, "is everything okay between you two?" I bit my lip, trying to hold back tears. "I don't know, Mrs. Grayson. He's changed." She gave my hand a comforting squeeze. "Give it time, dear. Marriage is a big step. Perhaps he's just adjusting." I nodded, but deep down, doubts were setting in. Was this how my married life was going to be? In the shadow of Lucas's coldness? Determined to find answers, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Days turned into weeks, and the cold atmosphere in our home continued. The initial days of trying to break the ice with Lucas had led to a routine of silence. I'd find myself often staring at the wall, counting the minutes until he'd return home. But when he did, it was as if I was living with a stranger. One evening, I decided to cook his favorite meal, hoping it might cheer him up or at least get him to talk. As I set the table, I thought of our earlier days and how he'd compliment my cooking. Now, the very idea of him sitting to eat with me seemed like a distant dream. Lucas walked in later than usual. I greeted him with a hesitant smile. "Hey, I made your favorite tonight." He glanced at the table and then at me. I ate out." "Oh," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Okay." There was a moment of silence. "Lucas," I started, my voice firm, "we need to talk." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not now, Tiffany." "When then? You've been distant for weeks. I don't even know what's going on in your life anymore." Lucas looked at me, his face expressionless. "It's just work. There's a lot of pressure." I nodded slowly. "But we used to talk, Lucas. We used to share. Now I feel like I'm living with a ghost." Lucas looked away, not meeting my eyes. "I need some space, Tiffany." The words felt like a blow. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Space? We live together, Lucas. We're married. If there's a problem, we should be facing it together." He didn't reply, just turned and headed towards our bedroom, leaving me standing there, lost and confused. The next morning, I woke up to find him already gone. The bed was neatly made, and a note lay on the pillow next to mine. "Had to leave early. Don't wait up." Days passed, and the pattern continued. Lucas would leave early and return late, often after I'd gone to bed. We became like two ships passing in the night, with barely any interaction. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room flipping through an old photo album, tears streamed down my face. Pictures of our early days, our smiles, our closeness, seemed like memories from another lifetime. Mrs. Grayson dropped by unannounced. Noticing my tears, she sat next to me, concern evident on her face. "Tiffany, what's going on?" Wiping my tears, I replied, "It's Lucas, Mrs. Grayson. He's changed. I feel so alone." She looked at the pictures and then at me. "Marriage has its ups and downs, dear, but communication is key." I nodded. "I've tried talking to him, but he shuts me out." Mrs. Grayson patted my hand gently. "Then maybe it's time to take a different approach. Find out what's really bothering him." Taking a deep breath, I nodded. "You're right. I need to get to the bottom of this." Determined to uncover the mystery behind Lucas's behavior, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. The nights were the hardest. Alone in the vast mansion, I'd often find myself waiting for Lucas to walk through the door. But more often than not, the ticking of the clock was the only sound that kept me company. One evening, after yet another night alone, desperation took over. I decided to call Mrs. Grayson. Perhaps she knew something I didn't. Maybe she could talk some sense into Lucas. "Mrs. Grayson?" I started hesitantly when she picked up the phone. "It's Tiffany. I was hoping to speak with you about Lucas." There was a brief pause, then in a softer tone, she replied, "Oh, Tiffany, what's the matter?" Taking a deep breath, I confessed, "Lucas hasn't been coming home. He's hardly ever here, and I don't know what to do." To my surprise, her tone shifted instantly. "Tiffany, my son has responsibilities, bigger than you might understand. He's managing a massive company, trying to maintain our family's legacy." Stammering, I tried to explain. "I understand, but he doesn't come home. At all. Nights are so lonely." Mrs. Grayson's voice hardened. "You knew what you were getting into when you married him. You need to adjust and be grateful for the life he's providing you." Tears filled my eyes. "I just want our marriage to be how I imagined." There was a cold silence. Then she said, "Lucas mentioned you might be difficult, always wanting more. You should be thankful for what you have, Tiffany." The conversation ended shortly after, leaving me even more bewildered and alone. Whatever Lucas had told his mother had painted me in a terrible light. What was he hiding? Why was he driving this wedge between his family and me? It was clear that I needed answers, and I was determined to find them. I enlisted the help of an old classmate, David, now a private detective. Within days, he presented me with photos that made my heart sink. Days turned into nights, and my sense of isolation grew. Each evening felt like an echo of the previous one. I'd walk through the grand halls, touching the expensive decor, but feeling more disconnected than ever. One gloomy afternoon, while I sat in the drawing room staring blankly at the pouring rain outside, my phone vibrated. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" I said hesitantly. "Tiffany, dear. It's Aunt Margaret, Lucas's aunt." Surprised, I replied, "Oh, hello, Aunt Margaret. It's nice to hear from you." Her voice was warm, but there was a hint of concern. "I just wanted to check in and see how you were feeling, dear. It's been so long since our last chat." I was puzzled. "I'm fine, thank you. Why do you ask?" She hesitated, then said, "Well, Lucas mentioned you'd been struggling lately. He said you'd been having a tough time adjusting and dealing with some personal health issues." I blinked in confusion. "Health issues?" Aunt Margaret continued. "Yes, he mentioned you were battling severe depression and that he's been so worried about you." The weight of realization hit me. This was the story Lucas was spinning to his family. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. I don't know where he got that from, Aunt Margaret. I've been lonely, yes, but I'm not suffering from depression." Aunt Margaret sounded genuinely surprised. "Oh, well, he seemed so concerned. He even said he was getting you the best treatment and medications." My mind raced. Not only had Lucas been lying about his whereabouts, but he'd also been crafting an elaborate tale about my supposed condition to his family. Trying to keep my composure, I said, "Thank you for your concern, Aunt Margaret. I'll have to talk to Lucas about this." Before we ended the call, she added, "Well, since you're feeling better, I'd love for you to come to my birthday celebration next week. I'm inviting close family, and it would be lovely to see you." "Of course," I replied, trying to mask the turmoil inside me. "I'd love to." Once the call ended, my emotions were a whirlwind. Lucas's deceit ran deeper than I'd imagined. But Aunt Margaret's invitation gave me an idea. It would be the perfect place to confront him, surrounded by the very family he'd lied to. As I pondered my next moves, I felt a newfound determination. Lucas had woven a web of lies, but I was ready to expose the truth. The festive atmosphere of Aunt Margaret's birthday celebration was in full swing when I decided it was time. As guests laughed and chatted, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the confrontation. Lucas stood amidst a group, laughing at some joke, appearing to be the perfect son and husband. I approached him, my hands clutching the jars of medication, each one empty. The murmurs of the gathering dimmed as all eyes turned to us. With every step, my resolve hardened. "Lucas," I said, my voice loud enough to command the attention of the room. I placed the medicine jars in front of him, their labels glaringly evident. He glanced at them, his laughter fading, confusion clouding his eyes. "What's this?" he asked, his tone flippant. "These are the medications I'm supposedly on," I responded. "The ones you've been telling everyone you've been buying for me." He stared at them, genuinely puzzled. "Why are you showing me these?" He picked up one jar, examining it before carelessly tossing it onto the floor. "This," I said, pointing at the shattered jar, "is how much you know about my so-called illness. You can't even recognize the medication you claim to buy for me." Whispers swept through the room as realization dawned on the guests. The air grew thick with tension. Lucas's face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his eyes betrayed his panic. Aunt Margaret stepped forward, her face a mask of shock and anger. "Lucas, is this true? Have you been lying to us about Tiffany's health?" He couldn't respond, cornered by the weight of his deceit. The room was a sea of accusing eyes, each one demanding answers. "I trusted you, Lucas," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "Not only did you betray me, but you also lied to your family, to everyone who cared about us." He looked down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The room remained silent, the weight of the revelation sinking in. All the pretense, the stories, the lies, they had finally caught up with him. With the shattered medicine jar as the only sound, the room was thick with tension. Lucas had gone pale, his confident facade crumbled. I wasn't done, though. With one last ace up my sleeve, I took out the pictures David had given me. Pictures that showed Lucas with a woman who wasn't me. "Recognize her?" I asked, handing the pictures to Aunt Margaret, who was closest to me. She looked at them, her eyes widening with recognition and dismay. "Oh no, Lucas, not her," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "What is it, Aunt Maggie?" one of the cousins, Sarah, asked. Aunt Margaret looked up, her expression grave. "This is Isabella Travers. She's well known in our community, for all the wrong reasons." I felt a chill. The way Aunt Margaret said it, it seemed this Isabella had a history with the family. Lucas's mother, Mrs. Grayson, approached and took a look at the photos. The color drained from her face. "I thought you were done with her after—" She stopped, shaking her head. "I can't believe you'd do this to Tiffany, to all of us." Lucas was cornered, looking between the two women with panic evident in his eyes. "Mom, it's not what you think," he started, but Aunt Margaret interrupted him. "We all warned you about her years ago, Lucas. We thought marrying Tiffany would have set you on the right path. Isabella is nothing but trouble." Lucas seemed to shrink, his posture slouched and defeated. "It's not like that. I mean, it started out, but it's complicated." "Complicated?" I echoed, my voice sharp. "You marry me, lie about my health, and all the while you're with her? Explain that complication to me." Lucas opened his mouth, then closed it, no words coming out. He looked broken, defeated, but I felt no sympathy. He had deceived everyone, and it was time for the truth. Aunt Margaret, visibly upset, handed the photos back to me. "Tiffany, I'm so sorry," she said. "You deserve so much better than this." I nodded, looking at the pictures. "Thank you, Aunt Maggie. All I wanted was the truth." The room was filled with murmured conversations as the party guests processed the revelations. Lucas looked around. No friends in sight, no allies to defend him. He had played his games, and now he was facing the consequences. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The truth was out, and I was ready to move forward, away from the lies and deceit that had become my life. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The beauty outside stood in stark contrast to the turmoil that had just occurred inside the Grayson household. I sat on the porch steps, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. David approached me, his usual confident demeanor replaced with genuine concern.
"Are you okay?"
he asked. I looked up, forcing a smile.
"I will be. Thanks for everything, David. Without you, I'd still be in the dark."
He sat down next to me. "I just wish I could have done more. No one should go through what you did." I sighed. "It's done now. All that's left is to move forward." He looked out towards the horizon. "What will you do now?" "I haven't decided," I replied. "But I know I can't stay here. I need a fresh start somewhere away from all this." David nodded. "You deserve happiness, Tiffany. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I smiled, feeling a warmth despite the situation. "Thank you, David." Inside, the murmur of voices continued. Some of the family were angry, some confused, but the truth was out, and everyone knew it. I had no intentions of going back inside. Not now, not ever. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out and saw a message from Mrs. Grayson. "I'm so sorry for what happened. We will refuse Lucas financial support. He can forget about inheriting the family company. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Take care of yourself." I replied with a simple "thank you" and put the phone back in my pocket. After a while, David stood up. "I should get going. If you ever need anything, Tiffany, just call, okay?" I nodded. "I will. Thanks again, David." He smiled, patting my shoulder reassuringly, and walked away. The house behind me felt cold, unwelcoming. The only thing tying me to it was the memories, and now they were all tainted. The next morning, I packed up my belongings, leaving behind everything that reminded me of Lucas and the life I thought I had. Aunt Margaret offered to help, but I declined. This was something I had to do alone. As I drove away, I didn't look back. The house, Lucas, the lies, they were all behind me. Ahead lay a new journey, new beginnings, and a chance at happiness. The end was also a new beginning. I knew challenges awaited, but I also knew I was strong enough to face them. With each mile I put between myself and the past, the brighter my future looked. The road ahead was open, and I was ready to embark on my next adventure, free from the shadows of deceit. And as I drove into the rising sun, I felt a sense of hope and renewal, knowing that the best was yet to come.
I'm Emily, 35, and if you'd asked me a few years ago, I'd have told you my life was just about perfect. I was climbing the corporate ladder at a renowned company, making my way to a department manager position. It was during those long hours at work that I stumbled upon something unexpected, something that wasn't part of my meticulously planned career path. Love. His name was Jake, a colleague from a different department. He wasn't as high up on the career ladder as I was, but that never mattered to me. Our connection was instant, and before we knew it, our office romance blossomed into something deeper, leading us down the aisle. The company we worked for was supportive. After all, it wasn't a secret affair, but a serious relationship that everyone could see was genuine. We were happy, living in a beautiful, spacious house that we bought together. It was more than a home. It was a symbol of our future, of the family we dreamed of starting. But our seemingly perfect life wasn't without its cracks. The main issue? Our earnings. I always earned more than Jake, and while it never bothered me, it was a thorn in his side. One chilly evening, as we sat in our living room, Jake brought it up yet again. Does it ever get to you? The whole money thing?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace. "No, Jake, it really doesn't. I love you, not your paycheck. We're in this together, remember?" I replied, trying to reassure him. He let out a long sigh. "I just feel like I should be the one bringing in more, you know? It's not traditional." I reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We're not a traditional couple, Jake. We make our own rules. We're happy, aren't we?" He nodded, but his eyes didn't mirror the conviction in his voice. The topic was a recurring one, resurfacing every now and then, each time leaving a faint but lingering unease in the air. Life has a way of throwing you off course when you least expect it. That's exactly what happened to me, Emily, on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. It was supposed to be a routine medical checkup, nothing more. I sat there in the sterile doctor's office, fidgeting with the hem of my shirt, waiting for the usual all clear. Instead, what I got was a jolt that turned my world upside down. The doctor, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, had a serious look as she delivered the news. "Emily, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you have cancer," she said gently. For a moment, everything stood still. The word cancer echoed in my head like a dreadful bell. Fear, disbelief, a sense of unreality washed over me. What? Are you sure?" I managed to stammer, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. The doctor nodded, her expression empathetic. "I understand this is a lot to take in. We need to discuss your treatment options." Her voice faded into the background as I grappled with the shock. Cancer? Me? It didn't make sense. I was healthy, or so I thought. When I left the doctor's office, I felt like I was in a daze. The world seemed to go on around me, but I was stuck in that moment of devastating revelation. I called Jake as soon as I could. He answered after a few rings. "Hey Em, how did the checkup go?" His voice was casual, expecting routine news. "Jake, it's not good." I said, my voice shaky. What's wrong? Talk to me, Em, he replied, his tone shifting to concern. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It's cancer, Jakey. I have cancer. There was a heavy silence on the other end. Then, oh God, Em, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm still at the clinic. I'm not okay, Jakey. I'm scared, I admitted, feeling a lump forming in my throat. I'll come right over. We'll face this together, Em. You're not alone, he said firmly. Hearing his words, a small flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this nightmare together. The following days were a blur of appointments, tests, and consultations. I started my treatment, which included chemotherapy. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. Jake was supportive at first, accompanying me to my sessions, holding my hand, trying to be strong for both of us. But as the treatments took a toll on me, I noticed a change in Jake. His visits became less frequent, his reassurances felt more forced. Whenever I asked him why he couldn't come, he always had the same excuse. Work is just crazy right now, Em. I'm so tired by the end of the day, he'd say over the phone. I tried to understand, to be sympathetic. After all, he was dealing with this in his own way, too. But deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling of growing distance, the creeping sense of loneliness that started to envelop me. In those moments of solitude and struggle, I found an unexpected source of strength. My parents and my best friend, Lisa. They were my rocks, calling me daily, visiting me whenever they could, offering words of encouragement and love. While I was trying to adjust to my new reality in the hospital, undergoing treatment and dealing with the side effects, life outside continued. I missed our home, the comfort of our bed, the little rituals Jake and I had. Despite his decreasing visits, I clung to the hope that we were still a team. One day, Lisa came to visit. She brought some magazines, my favorite snacks, and a sense of normalcy that I craved. But there was something off about her. She seemed uneasy. Hey, what's up? You seem a bit distracted, I said, trying to read her expression. Lisa hesitated before speaking. Emily, I don't want to worry you, but something strange happened the other day. My heart skipped a beat. What happened? Well, I was walking past your house, and I heard laughter. Loud, female laughter. It sounded like there was a party or something, she said cautiously. A cold shiver ran down my spine. A party? But Jake didn't mention anything. Maybe he had friends over. Lisa bit her lip, looking uncomfortable. I don't know, Emily. It just felt weird. And I haven't seen Jake around much lately. I'm worried there might be someone else. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't want to believe it, but the seeds of doubt were planted. Was Jake seeing someone else while I was stuck here, fighting for my life? I need to know, Lisa. I can't just sit here wondering, I said, a sense of urgency rising within me. I understand, but what are you going to do? Lisa asked, her concern evident. I need to go home. I need to see for myself, I decided, my mind made up. But Emily, your treatment. I know, but I can't ignore this. I have to know the truth, I interrupted, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and fear. Lisa helped me arrange for an early discharge. The doctors weren't thrilled, but my recent results were promising, and they agreed under the condition that I would continue my treatment on an outpatient basis. The drive home was nerve-wracking. Every possible scenario played out in my mind. I was scared of what I might find, yet I needed answers. As we pulled up to the house, everything looked normal from the outside. But the moment we stepped in, it was clear something was off. The place felt different, like it wasn't ours anymore. We heard voices coming from the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as we walked in, bracing for what we might find. To my utter shock, there was a couple sitting there, looking as surprised to see us as we were to see them. Who are you? What are you doing in my house? I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The woman, probably in her late 30s, stood up. I'm sorry, but who are you? We're renting this place. Renting? This is my house. I live here with my husband, Jake, I said, struggling to process her words. The man, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. We've been here for a couple of weeks. We made a deal with Jake. He said the house was going to be sold, and we're interested in buying it. My world came crashing down at that moment. Not only was there another woman in my house, but now I was being told that my husband, the man I trusted, was planning to sell our home without my knowledge. I felt like I was in a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. As I stood in the living room of what was once a symbol of our shared dreams, the couple who had unwittingly walked into this mess looked at me with a mix of confusion and pity. They introduced themselves as Mark and Sandra, clearly uncomfortable but trying to be polite. I could hardly focus on their words. My mind was in turmoil. "Please, can you call Jake? I need to speak to him," I said, my voice shaky but firm. Mark nodded, taking out his phone. "Of course, I have his number. He said to call if we needed anything." The wait for Jake to arrive was agonizing. My heart raced with a cocktail of emotions: anger, betrayal, disbelief. When he finally walked in, the look on his face was one of shock, but not the kind I expected. "Emily, what are you doing here? You should be in the hospital," he said, his voice tinged not with concern, but annoyance. His reaction only fueled my anger. "What am I doing here? Jake, what are you doing? Selling our house behind my back?" He had the audacity to look irritated. "I can explain, Emily. It's simple, really." "Explain? Explain how you could betray me like this?" My voice was rising despite my efforts to control it. Jake's expression hardened. "Listen, Emily, you're sick. The cancer might not even go away. I have to think about my life too. I can't be tied down, waiting for whatever comes next." I felt like I had been slapped. His words were cruel, unrecognizable from the man I thought I knew. "You're talking about selling our home, our life together, as if it's just a transaction. Is this really you, Jake?" Disbelief and hurt were evident in my voice. He shrugged, a cold look in his eyes. "It's practical, Emily. You're not going to make it, and I need the money to build my life. Besides, I would get this house anyway if you know." His words were like a knife twisting in my gut. The reality of his betrayal was worse than any suspicion I had harbored. "I can't believe you, Jake. After everything, this is what it comes down to. Money and convenience?" I was struggling to hold back tears. Jake seemed unfazed. "Life goes on, Emily. Yours might not, but mine will. I need to think about my future." His brazenness left me speechless. I had imagined many scenarios, but nothing could have prepared me for the callousness I was witnessing. "And you think you'll just get away with this? Selling our house? Leaving me with nothing while I'm fighting for my life?" My voice trembled with a mixture of rage and pain. He shrugged again, a gesture that now filled me with revulsion. "I'm doing what I have to. You can do whatever you want, Emily. It doesn't matter to me anymore." I felt a surge of resolve amidst the chaos of my emotions. "I'll fight you on this, Jake, and the company will hear about how you treat your sick wife. You won't get away with this," he scoffed. "Do what you want, Emily. I'm done here." With that, he turned and left, leaving a trail of coldness behind. I stood there, shaken to my core, realizing that the man I loved was a stranger to me now. I knew at that moment that this was a battle I had to fight, not just for my health, but for justice and dignity. After Jake left, a heavy silence filled the room. Mark and Sandra stood awkwardly, clearly wanting to escape the tense atmosphere. I couldn't blame them. "Look, I'm really sorry about all this. We had no idea," Mark said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "Yeah, we just wanted a place to stay. We didn't know about everything," Sandra added, her eyes full of sympathy. I gave them a weak smile. "It's not your fault. You were just looking for a home." They offered to leave, but I insisted they stay. It wasn't their fault that Jake had dragged them into his deceit. After they left, I sat down on the couch, my mind racing. I felt betrayed, angry, and helpless. But amidst all those emotions, a fiery determination was taking shape. I wasn't going to let Jake walk all over me. The next morning, I called my lawyer and explained everything. He was shocked, but promised to help me fight this. "Don't worry, Emily. We'll make sure he doesn't get away with this," he assured me. I felt a small glimmer of hope. With my lawyer's help, I would fight for what was rightfully mine. Next, I knew I had to confront Jake at work. It wasn't going to be easy, but I needed to face him. I wanted him to know that I wasn't going to back down. I arrived at the office, my heart pounding. As I walked through the halls, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. They knew something was up. I knocked on Jake's office door and pushed it open without waiting for a response. Jake looked up, his face a mask of surprise and annoyance. "Emily, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to tell you that I know everything. And I'm not going to let you get away with it," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Jake scoffed. "What are you going to do? You're sick, Emily. You should be resting, not causing a scene." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I've spoken to my lawyer. We're going to fight you on the house, and I'm going to tell the bosses about what you've done." Jake's face hardened. "You think you can scare me? Go ahead, tell them, see if I care." I met his gaze squarely. "I'm not trying to scare you, Jake. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can't just throw me away because I'm sick." Jake leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. "You really think you can win this? I'm not the bad guy here, Emily. I'm just trying to move on with my life." I felt a surge of anger. By selling our home? By leaving me with nothing? Jake shrugged. "Life is tough, Emily. You should know that better than anyone." I shook my head, disgusted. "I can't even recognize you anymore, Jake. You're not the man I married." Jake's expression didn't change. "Maybe you never really knew me at all." With that, I turned and walked out of his office. I had said what I needed to say. Now it was time to fight. In the days that followed, my life turned into a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and strategy sessions. My health was improving, but my battle was far from over. With each passing day, I gathered more evidence to support my claim to the house. My larger financial contribution was a strong point in my favor, and I was determined to see this through. My lawyer was optimistic. "Emily, you have a solid case. The numbers don't lie, and given the circumstances, it's unlikely a judge will side with Jake," he assured me over the phone. The relief I felt was palpable. "Thank you," I replied. "I appreciate your help more than you know." "We're not there yet, but things are looking up," he cautioned. I understood. The legal world was unpredictable, but for the first time in a while, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. At work, the atmosphere was tense. My confrontation with Jake had become office gossip. Some colleagues whispered in corners, others offered quiet support. It was uncomfortable, but I couldn't let it distract me. I decided to meet with our bosses and lay everything out. It was a tough conversation, but necessary. I told them about Jake's betrayal, the house, everything. They listened, their faces a mixture of shock and empathy. "We're so sorry, Emily. This is unacceptable," one of them said. "The situation with Jake will be dealt with. This behavior can't be tolerated," the other added. Hearing their support was a relief. I didn't have to face Jake at work anymore. Days later, they called to tell me they had let Jake go. His actions didn't align with the company's values. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to me. My health was on the upswing. The treatments were working, and my doctors were hopeful. It was a glimmer of hope in a sea of chaos. One evening, as I sat in my small rental, contemplating my next steps, my phone rang. It was Jake. I hesitated but answered. "Emily, please, we need to talk." He sounded desperate. "What's there to talk about, Jake?" I asked, my voice firm. "I was wrong. I've been fired. I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't think it would come to this," he said, almost pleading. I took a deep breath. "You hurt me, Jake. Deeply. I can't just forget that." "I know, I regret it. Can we find a way to settle this without going to court?" he asked, sounding beaten. After a short pause, I replied, "I will not back down. Never." There was silence on the other end. "I understand. I'll have my lawyer contact yours," he finally said. Jake's call didn't change anything. He had shown his true colors, and there was no going back. I was a different person now, stronger and more determined. After the dust settled with the house and my divorce, I found myself standing at the beginning of a new chapter. It was a strange feeling, like stepping into the unknown after a long, turbulent journey. My health was improving, but the road to full recovery was still ahead of me. One afternoon, I was at the clinic for a checkup. The waiting room was quiet, just the hum of the air conditioner filling the space. When the nurse called my name, I followed her to the examination room. Dr. Simmons, my oncologist, greeted me with a warm smile. "Good to see you, Emily. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," I replied, taking a seat. "That's what we like to hear," he said, going over my chart. "Your latest scans show improvement. The treatment is working." I exhaled a sigh of relief. "That's great news." "Yes, but remember, it's a long road. You need to take care of yourself," he reminded me. "I know, and I will," I assured him. He nodded, satisfied. "Good. We'll keep monitoring your progress." Leaving the clinic, I felt a mix of emotions. Hope, certainly, but also a sense of responsibility. This was my life, and I had to take charge of it. Back at work, I threw myself into my projects. It was a distraction, but also a reminder that I had a purpose beyond my illness and personal troubles. One day, I was in the break room when I overheard a couple of colleagues talking. "Did you hear about Jake? He's trying to get his job back," one of them said. "Really? After what he did?" "Good luck with that," the other replied. I stayed silent, stirring my coffee. Jake's choices were his own. I had my path to follow, and it didn't include him. After work, I met up with my friend Sarah for dinner. She had been a rock throughout everything. "How are you holding up?" she asked as we sat down. "I'm okay, taking it one day at a time," I answered. "That's all you can do, and hey, you're doing amazing," she said, offering a reassuring smile. I nodded. "Thanks, I couldn't have done it without your support." "We're in this together," she said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass with hers. The next few months were a blend of routine and small victories. Each doctor's visit brought good news. My strength was returning, and with it, a newfound determination to live life on my terms. The treatments had worked, and the doctors were optimistic. I was officially in remission. As I walked into the office that morning, I felt a sense of pride. I had not only kept my job through the toughest times, but also excelled. My team greeted me with warm smiles and congratulations. The workday was busy, but I didn't mind. Being productive gave me a sense of normalcy. Later, I met Sarah for lunch. She had been more than a friend. She was my pillar of strength. "You look radiant, Emily," she said as we sat down at our favorite cafe. "I feel it too, Sarah. It's like a new beginning," I responded, smiling. "And you deserve every bit of it." "So, what's next for you?" she asked, sipping her coffee. "I've been thinking about that. I want to give back, maybe volunteer at the cancer center. Share my story, help others," I said, the idea resonating with me more and more. "That's wonderful, Emily. You'll be amazing at it," she encouraged. After lunch, I went for a walk in the park. The sun was shining and the air was fresh. I took a moment to sit on a bench and just breathe. Life was precious, and I was here, living it. As I walked back home, my phone rang. It was my boss, Mr. Thompson. "Emily, good news. The board has approved your proposal for the new project," he said. "That's fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Thompson." "I won't let you down," I replied, excitement building up. "I know you won't. Keep up the good work," he said, before ending the call. Back at home, I reflected on my journey. From the shock of my diagnosis to the betrayal and divorce, it had been a roller coaster of emotions. But here I was, standing tall. I decided to write a blog post, sharing my story with the world. As I typed, the words flowed effortlessly. It was a story of pain, resilience, and ultimately, triumph. When I hit publish, I felt a sense of liberation. My story was out there, and if it could inspire even one person, it was worth it.